What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was neglected by his entire village until he returned as a god-level threat? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. It was the dead of night when Uzumaki Naruto found himself wandering the streets of Konoha. During the day, the streets of Konohagakure were teeming with people, but late at night, the streets were scarce of life. The streets were only lit by the bright moon and starry sky above, and the sound of crickets chirping filled the otherwise silent night. Naruto enjoyed walking these streets at night. It helped him feel more at peace despite the inner turmoil within him. Naruto was a young, 11-year-old boy, with spiky blonde hair, bright blue eyes and slightly cherub-like face. He was wearing an orange tracksuit with blue on the upper shoulders area as well as around the waist, a white swirl with a tassel on the left side, a red swirl on the back, a large white collar, orange pants, blue sandals, and a pair of goggles on his forehead. Perhaps the most prominent feature about the young blonde were the 3 whisker marks that ran horizontally across each cheek, giving him the appearance of a fox or cat. All of the villagers in Konohagakure despised Naruto's very existence for reasons that the young boy did not even know. No matter where he went, the small blonde would be subject to glares and sneers sent his way, and when they weren't looking at him with hate-filled eyes, they were ignoring him, as if his very existence was beneath their notice. It had been like this for as long as he could remember, and never ceased to make him feel worthless. Despite this, or perhaps in spite of it, the way people ignored him only fueled his desire to become Hokage, the leader of his village, even more, so that the villagers that resent him could become people that look up to him and acknowledge him as somebody who wants to help his village. A small, genuine smile came to his face as he took a deep breath of fresh air through his nose and exhaled through his mouth. Naruto smiled all the time, no matter the situation, but to those who knew Naruto well enough could tell that it was nothing but a mask to hide how negatively he truly felt. The only times he smiled genuinely anymore was when he hung out with Teuchi, Ayame and the elderly Hokage. Naruto had been in the Shinobi Academy for many years, so you might have expected Naruto to have made a lot of friends. In truth, Naruto only got along with Shikamaru and Choji. Everybody else either disliked him, didn't care about him, or were too shy to approach him. Naruto placed his hand on the back of his head as he looked up at the starry sky, making out any constellations that he knew of. When he looked back down, he noticed he was in the front of Konohagakure's main entrance gate. Naruto had contemplated a few times whether leaving a village that hated him would be a smart decision or not. In the end, he decided to remain in his village and continue to follow his dream of becoming Hokage no matter what the obstacle. Naruto listened to the light snoring of the 2 shinobi that were assigned to keep watch over the gate, but they had once again fallen asleep at their posts since Konoha had been at peace for years. Heck, it was so late the night that the Anbu that had been stationed to watch over Naruto had also decided to call it a night. Naruto was about to walk away and return home when he noticed something out of the corner of his eyes. Had it not been for his enhanced sense of sight, he would have most likely mistaken it for a bump in the road, but at closer inspection, it turned out to be a person. Naruto could not make out the gender or condition of the person at that moment since there was a large, tan cloak over the person's form. Naruto frowned at this and decided to help the person as he ran up to the figure's side and knelt down. "Hey, are you okay?" Naruto questioned as he shook he or she. With that damn cloak, it was impossible to tell. After getting no response, he frowned and tried again. "Oi, are you listening to me? Wake up." Once again he got nothing. Naruto sat back on his haunches and adopted a thinking pose, the whisker marks on his cheeks stretching as his eyes scrunched up, giving him a very vulpine appearance. After a few moments of thought, he decided to flip the person over onto their back, so he could get a closer look at them. It was still hard to tell, the person's face was covered in so much dirt, grime and dried blood, but he could vaguely make out the features of a girl. Of course, at the moment all he saw was the blood. "Oh my god, she's bleeding, what do I do? What do I do?" Naruto began running around the unconscious girl in a mild panic, his mind in disarray at seeing someone injured. "I should call Ji-chan. No, wait, he's probably asleep. I should call the Anbu. Ah damn it. They're probably asleep too. The hospital?" Naruto shivered, he hated hospitals. "Okay, calm down Naruto, just calm down." It took a moment, But eventually the young blonde managed to calm himself down enough so that he could begin to think logically. Or at least, as logically as the mind of Uzumaki Naruto could think. Okay, so there's a girl and she's lying on the side of the road, injured. I can't call Ji-chan and most of the ninja in the village have gone to sleep. He looked over at the ninja in the booth at the front gates, still snoring. Point proven. And I don't even think the hospital's open, so that's a no-go, even if I wanted to go there. Of course, his hatred of hospitals meant there was no way he was going to head there, and he was sure as hell this girl wouldn't want to wake up there either. Honestly, who would want to wake up to bland white walls and those mean idiots in the white uniforms? I could take her to my place and fix her up, the blonde frowned. The idea had merit, but he wasn't sure if he was comfortable having a complete stranger in his house. Then again, he couldn't just leave her in the middle of the road either. Besides, wasn't the Hokage supposed to look after his people? Looking down at the girl he sighed. My apartment it is. Steeling himself, Naruto bent down, lifted the figure and positioned her on his back. He thought about calling for help, but decided against it. Nobody would answer his plea for help, so there was no point in him wasting his breath. Naruto walked quickly, adjusting to the new weight he had to carry before he began to sprint. Over at the gate, within the booth, one of the Chunin guards woke up. Hey, Azumo, did you hear something? The spiky-headed Chunin with the bandage across his nose asked, mildly shaking his partner to wake him up. The one known as Azumo woke up with a start. Huh? Eh? What? What is it? What? I was asking if you heard something? Huh? Heard something? Azumo looked at his partner, tilting his head from side to side as he strained his ears. Nope, nothing. Good, me neither. And with that, both Chunin went back to sleep. It only took him 5 minutes to reach his house. The blonde academy student stopped in front of his door and turned the handle slightly, then kicked the door open. Flicking on the lights, the young blonde walked to his bed and lightly placed the girl on the bed. Naruto had felt a thick liquid go down his arm a minute or two ago, but now in the lit room, Naruto could see that the liquid was, in fact, blood. Naruto slowly removed the drenched cloak off of the young girl and placed it on a chair in the corner for it to dry. This was when Naruto was finally able to get a good look at the girl he had saved. The girl was about his age, slightly taller than him, and had peach skin that still showed through the grime and dried blood that seeped from the numerous small wounds from her arms and legs. I guess I should bandage up those wounds, Naruto thought to himself as he went to retrieve a first aid kit. Naruto returned shortly with the first aid kit that contained tools to be used from the smallest of cuts to some of the more grievous of wounds. It may come as a shock to know that Naruto knew first aid. In the academy he was known as the Dobi, due to the fact that he was at the bottom of his class. A combination of having to deal with the hatred of several teachers who did their utmost to ignore him, his dislike of lectures, an inability to sit still due to his high level of energy, and his penchant for ditching class to play pranks on people had caused his grades to plummet. There was also the fact that he was something of an idiot. Not exactly dumb, but definitely not the sharpest kunai of the set. However, if there was one thing Naruto did know how to do, it was dress people's wounds. Throughout his life the young blonde had gotten more than his fair share of cuts, scrapes and bruises from the various pranks he had pulled and the times he had trained. Though he would admit he pulled more pranks than he did train. Naruto only removed rubbing alcohol and bandages from the kit since it was all that would be needed, and packed everything else away. Naruto then proceeded to carefully pick up the blonde's arm and chose the wound he would begin with. He lightly dabbed at the wound, watching her cringe lightly in her sleep before he placed a bandage over the cut. Naruto repeated this process until he had completely finished. Placing what remained of the rubbing alcohol and bandages back into the first aid kit, he stood up and returned the small box where he had found it. Naruto returned to the girl and scanned her sleeping, bandaged form. Millions of questions went through Naruto's mind. Where is she from? Why is she hurt? What's she like? Will she be nice? Will she be mean? These questions and more zoomed through Naruto's mind and were only interrupted when a long yawn escaped him. Naruto decided it was time to call it a night. He thought about where he should sleep. Would it be okay if he slept in his bed? Probably not, and besides, she was injured and she deserved her own place to sleep. With that in mind, Naruto walked to the closet at the corner of the room and retrieved a futon, a spare pillow and a blanket in case it got cold during the night. Placing the futon on the ground, Naruto put the pillow at the end of it and placed the blanket by its side. Naruto was too tired to change clothes, so he lay down on the futon and instantly fell asleep as soon as his head hit his pillow. The next morning, small streams of light passed through the blinds and shined in the sleeping Naruto's eyes. He tried his best to keep them closed, but his efforts were fruitless, and with a reluctant sigh he stood up. Naruto took a minute or two to stretch, popping a few joints in the process before going to the sink and splashing his face with cold water to wake himself up fully. What do I do now? I can't not tell anybody about her, and Ji-chan would ask questions soon, so I should tell him at least, Naruto thought to himself as he looked at the girl still fast asleep on his bed. Deciding on a course of action for later, Naruto went into the kitchen and began to prepare breakfast for himself and for the blonde just in case she woke up soon. As Naruto prepared breakfast, his thoughts wandered off to the thought of him finally graduating from the academy and going on dangerous mission. Naruto snapped out of his contemplation to see that the eggs he had boiled were finished. Naruto wished he could have better food and a lot more of it, since what he had made was barely enough to feed him, let alone the both of them. Naruto distributed the eggs so that he got a barely anything and gave the sleeping girl the most. He would just go to eat Chiraku ramen later. Naruto quickly scarfed down his portion before looking over at the blonde girl, wondering if it was okay to leave her by herself. Naruto didn't want her to wake up and have her simply leave the house, since the chances of him finding her again would be very slim without him even knowing her name. Naruto decided that he would go talk to the Hokage about this girl, but as incentive to possibly have her stay here just in case she woke up, he walked over to her bed and placed the breakfast on the drawer at the side of the bed, which now included a glass of orange juice. If she saw the food, then she might see that she was in the house of somebody that wouldn't cause her any harm. Naruto got ready to leave when he heard the blonde girl stir in her sleep before watching her sit up in the bed. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Naruto's face, and as her first instinct mandated, she slapped him across the face, sending him across the room. "Who are you and where am I?" the girl demanded, standing on the bed, having been frightened by her new surroundings and this new stranger. "Is that how you go treating somebody that takes you off the street, fixes you up and gives you their bed to sleep in?" Naruto shouted back in anger. That slap didn't really hurt, but it stung into him. It showed an ungratefulness for everything he had done. The girl blinked twice at what the young blonde boy said before she looked down at herself to see that all the wounds she had were bandaged and she was standing in the only bed in the square apartment, and then she looked to her right to see a handful of hard-boiled eggs. It was safe to say that the blonde felt extremely sorry for hitting Naruto like she did. "I'm sorry," the blonde-haired girl apologized sincerely as she sat back down on the bed, looking away in embarrassment. Naruto was a little surprised to hear somebody actually apologize to him. "It's fine. It's my fault for surprising you like that," Naruto assured her as he sat at the edge of the bed, picking up the tray with her breakfast and placing it on her lap. The famished girl looked at it, then up at Naruto to see if he was sure about giving her food, only to be greeted by a reassuring close-eyed grin. "You were pretty beat up when I found you, but I brought you to my apartment and I fixed you up. How are you feeling?" Naruto asked the girl. The girl stopped eating for a moment as she pulled away one of the bandages to show that the wound underneath had already closed. "Wow, that's so cool. That's something you and I have in common. I heal pretty fast too," Naruto stated with a smile on his face, receiving a small smile from the blonde at the young boy's loud and childish personality. "I guess I should really thank you for helping me like you did." The young girl thanked the young blonde, who scratched the back of his head in his embarrassed habit as he waved it off. "You really don't need to thank me. I wouldn't be able to turn my back on somebody who needs help," Naruto told her modestly as he laughed. She smiled a little wider as she noticed that he wasn't just loud and childish, but could be slightly more mature if he wanted to. "Do you know where I am?" the girl questioned as she continued eating, Naruto looking at her curiously, not seeing how she could not know where she was. Nonetheless, he answered her question. "Right now, you're at my apartment in Konoha. Where are you from?" The blonde's eyes widened slightly at how far she was from home before deciding to tell Naruto where she did come from. "I'm from Kumogakure," the traveling girl revealed, Naruto gaining a questioning look on his face as he had never heard of Kumogakure before. "Where's Kumogakure?" Naruto questioned the girl as she sweat dropped at the young boy not knowing such a basic piece of geography. Konohagakure is in Hai no Kuni to the south while Kumogakure is in the Kaminari no Kuni in the far northeast. They're extremely far from each other and it would take weeks to travel the distance, the young girl explained as Naruto tried to draw a mental map in his head, but only succeeded in making two dots very apart from each other. No wonder you're so hungry, Naruto commented at hearing the time it took to go from Konoha to Kumo, but the blonde-haired girl misinterpreted Naruto. Are you calling me fat? The female demanded in a threatening tone. No women in the entire world wanted to be considered fat and all the men in the world knew this no matter what the age. Naruto waved his hands in front of him innocently as he spoke quickly, no. Of course not, I was just saying that going from Kumogakure to Konohagakure is a long trip and you must not have eaten a lot. The blonde-haired girl's expression went soft again as she lightly giggled at Naruto's reaction as he sighed in relief. Naruto slowly stood up from the bed and picked up the tray from the teen's lap and brought it to the sink before coming back as he spoke, I'm sorry that I can't offer you more since I've only had to make enough food for one. For one? What do you mean? What about your parents? The girl questioned as Naruto walked back to her bedside. I don't have any, but that doesn't stop me. I work hard every single day to get stronger and I will become the Hokage one day. Naruto asserted in his own way with a smile as he pumped a fist in the air. The girl felt bad that she brought up his parents, but found his answer and the way he said it interesting. It brought a smile to her face to see somebody so lively after being on the road for so long. I would ask about your parents, but since they're not with you. Naruto stopped in mid-sentence in surprise. The sentence seemed to leave his lips before he could think about what he was saying. You think they're dead, right? The girl inquired finished Naruto's question with a deadpan expression, Naruto nodding as he apologized again. My parents passed away when I was a little girl from a fatal disease. They were two of the most powerful shinobi in Kumogakure and I was proud to be their daughter, the orphan girl spoke in a sad voice. Naruto felt like the ass this time for bringing it up. Oh, I'm sorry I brought it up. Naruto apologized, the female nodding before silence reigned over the room once again. Naruto then observed that the blonde seemed to be having a little trouble keeping her eyes open out of exhaustion. You look tired so you should go to sleep, Naruto suggested, the feisty girl immediately refusing as she tried to stand up only to be lightly pushed back by Naruto. I have to go talk to somebody and I'll be right back, but can you promise me something? Naruto inquired of the girl who nodded and waited for Naruto to speak. I want you to promise me that you won't leave until I come back, Naruto spoke with an underlying hopefulness. He never really had a real friend and she seemed to becoming his first. He didn't want to let go of a new friend yet. Unknowing to him, the runaway felt the same way since Naruto was the first person she met in this new village and was incredibly nice to her. I promise, the blonde-haired girl promised with a firm nod and a smile, Naruto thanking her as he opened the door, waved one last goodbye and left. The violet-eyed girl was about to lay back down and go to sleep when Naruto came bursting through the door again with a blush on his face. I can't believe I forgot. Naruto shouted as he went through the doorway and right to the blonde who was laying on the bed as he outstretched his hand. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. What's your? Naruto questioned, his face red from embarrassment that he had forgotten to ask for such a basic piece of information. The girl went slightly red at forgetting this as well as she answered his question, shaking his hand. Yugito ni. Naruto opened the doors of the Hokage residence and walked in as the receptionist greeted him. Good morning, Naruto-kun. How can I help you? Naruto smiled as he greeted the receptionist before telling her his request. I want to talk with Ji-chan about something really important. After the initial, light scolding from the receptionist at Naruto talking about the Hokage so informally, she spoke with Hiruzen Sarutobi over the intercom and Naruto was then sent up. Sarutobi smiled as he puffed away on his pipe, enjoying the early morning as he sat behind his desk. The Sandaime Hokage was an aging man in his late 60s, with spiky gray hair and a short goatee. He had 3 wrinkles under each eye, as well as more running along his face and several liver spots, the signs of old age taking their toll on him. Despite this, Sarutobi Hiruzen continued his duty as the Hokage, ensuring that his village was kept safe from threats both outside and inside of its walls. It was looking to be a very beautiful day, there was no paperwork for the moment, being so early in the morning, and so the aging Hokage was able to just relax. Ha! Nothing beats starting the day with a good smoke. Here is inside in content, holding his pipe in one hand while he blew out smoke rings. As he continued smoking from his pipe, the Sandaime Hokage turned around in his seat and looked out at the village below. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, painting the village in bright oranges and reds. It looked like the village was on fire. It was a beautiful sight, and one of the many reasons Hai no Kuni, the country in which Konoha was situated in, was called the Land of Fire. And it looks like it's going to be another peaceful day too. Bang! Oi, Oja-san, I've got something I want to talk to you about. Looks like he spoke too soon. Sarutobi sighed. Putting out his pipe, the Sandaime set it down on the side and turned his chair to look at the rambunctious blonde that had just barged into his office. There was only one person who had the tact, specifically the complete lack thereof, that he would not only enter his office in such a way, but also call him old man in the process. "What can I do for you today, Naruto-kun?" asked Sarutobi with a genial smile. While the boy may be annoying, the old Sandaime always spared some time for the blonde, and in truth felt partially responsible for him. While the rest of the village may not treat Naruto like the hero he deserved to be, Sarutobi always strived to do his best for the boy. "There's something important I need to talk to you about," Naruto said, a look of utmost seriousness on his face. Serious for Naruto at least. "Oh, and what is it that you wish to discuss?" Naruto blinked, his mind processing the word discuss as he didn't know that word. Eventually he shrugged, putting the word into the back of his mind and telling the Hokage what he came to talk about. "Yesterday I found this girl and—" "Found this girl?" Sarutobi interrupted. "Don't you mean, met, this girl?" "No, found," Naruto said, giving the old man a stubborn look, his arms crossed and his chin jutting out in childish obstinacy. "And what do you mean by found?" questioned Sarutobi, raising an eyebrow. "Well, she was unconscious? Yeah, that." Naruto nodded his head and continued. "Anyways, I found her on the side of the road, injured and unconscious, and decided to take her back home and give her some first aid." "I see," Hiruzen said, stroking his beard in thought. It was very rare for someone to turn up unconscious and injured in his village. With all of the ninja he had patrolling and keeping the peace, crimes and the like were very rare. Not to say they didn't happen, but they only happened once in a blue moon. "And what do you know about this girl?" "Her name's Ni Yugito. And she's from Kumogakure? Yeah, that." Sarutobi frowned. A girl showing up in his village in the middle of the night, injured, was rare enough. An injured girl who came all the way from Kumogakure and managed to slip in during the night was something that had never happened before. For a shinobi, Kumo was around several weeks of traveling, for a civilian it was around 2 months. And due to the strained relationship Konoha had with the Hidden Lightning Village, someone coming from Kumo to here was very rare, with only a few merchants traveling between the villages. All these thoughts came and went within the Sandaime's mind in less than a second as he looked at the blonde and thought. "And what is it you wish from me regarding this girl? Can she stay?" The answer was not only immediate but entirely expected. Hiruzen had already figured out more or less what Naruto was going to ask, and had even come up with an answer. "For now," Sarutobi replied. Naruto opened his mouth, and the Sandaime could easily sense the boy was about to complain. He quickly intervened before the boy could say anything. "I am not saying she cannot stay, however, as Hokage I cannot rule out the possibility that she is a possible enemy ninja sent here for some notorious purpose. It wasn't as rare as one might think for young ninja to be sent on infiltration missions into enemy territory as spies or assassins. Who would suspect a child could be a trained killer? Not counting some people who were legendary for being child prodigies. How could you say that?" Naruto exploded. "She was injured when I found her. It's obvious she's not. She could be faking it, Naruto-kun." Sarutobi interrupted the boy's rant. "There are many ninja in this world who have graduated at an age as young as you, some even younger. As Hokage it is my duty to ensure that it remains protected from all threats." Naruto couldn't argue with that. The moment Sarutobi had brought up his duty as Hokage, the blonde was cut short. Being someone who wanted to be Hokage himself, the young boy would never say anything that might slight the title of Hokage. "So she can't stay?" asked Naruto, sounding depressed. "I didn't say that," Sarutobi said, making the blonde look up. "I merely said I must ensure that she is not a threat before I allow her citizenship." I will need to speak with one of my shinobi, and he will interview her and ensure that she is not a threat to the village. Afterwards, if everything checks out, I will simply have her fill out some forms that will make her a citizen of Konoha. Oh, now, it will take a while to set up the interview. The ninja I have in mind is currently busy with something I have him doing. It will be about 2 days before the interview takes place. In that time I will allow you to show her around Konoha. It would also allow him to observe the girl before the interview and help determine whether she was a threat. How does that sound? Great, Naruto said. I'll tell Yugito right away. Thanks Oja-san. Sarutobi watched as Naruto ran out of the room. When the door closed he pressed a button on his intercom and spoke into a small microphone. Miss Kaizuki, please inform Inoichi-san that I wish to see him at his earliest convenience. Right away, Hokage-sama, came the voice from the speaker system. Turning the intercom off, Sarutobi opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a small, crystal orb. He set it on a pedestal and ran through a few hand seals, activating a jutsu within the orb. The orb took on a blue glow briefly, before an image appeared inside, one of Naruto running through the streets, a grin stretched across his face. Now, it's time to find out more about this Miss Ni Yugito. Yugito awoke to the bright light streaming in through the window. Her eyes fluttered open briefly before shutting them again when the midday sun's rays hit her eyes and burned her retina. She rolled over onto her face, away from the light, then opened her eyes again. A few moments later, after letting her eyesight adjust, Yugito Ni pushed herself into a sitting position. She looked around the room, remembering that this was Naruto's bedroom. Thinking along those lines brought a bit of a blush as she had never been in a male's room, or anybody else's for that matter. The bedroom was very basic. Aside from the bed she was resting in there was a large poster of the Konoha leaf symbol behind it. To her immediate left was a potted plant, a small palm tree that was bred indoors. A glance off to the side she saw a window that showed a perfect view of the famous Hokage monument, the mountain that had the 4 Hokages carved onto it. On the other side was a basic nightstand with an old, orange alarm clock. Over on the opposite side of the room was a large dresser made of a lighter wood than the nightstand, and next to that was a full-body mirror leaning against the wall. There was also a sliding glass door on the opposite side of the door leading out of the room that led to a balcony. She could see the steel railings bordering it and a pair of slippers sitting off to the side. The room itself was made up of light green walls, worn and faded with several cracks on them. A calendar was hanging on one side of the wall, and there were a few small posters with various kanji on them. She even saw one next to the palm tree with a cup of steaming ramen on it. How weird was that? The lower third of the wall was made of up-tiled wood. There were a few stains that came with age, but other than that it looked well kept. The ceiling, like the walls, were green in color and the floor was made of wooden paneling in a light red color. Yugito thought the place looked kind worn and aged, but it was obvious that Naruto took decent care of the place. Letting the sheet fall off of her body, she got off the bed, bare feet touching the floor as she stood up and stretched for a moment. However, as she stretched a wretched stench hit her overly sensitive nose. Her nose crinkled in disgust, and it took her a moment to realize that the smell was coming from her. This was something Yugito realized she should have expected. Having been on the run for nearly 3 months, she'd had very few chances to bath, the last time being about 3 weeks ago. Obviously, she was going to be dirty and smelly. Naruto said he had to go speak to someone, and since he didn't wake me up he should still be out. Despite this thought, Yugito decided she would check to make sure Naruto was really gone. Walking over to the door, the blonde-haired female opened it and walked out into the small hallway. She quickly checked the dining room and the kitchen. When she was sure Naruto was not in the apartment, she made her way to the bathroom. I'm sure he won't mind if I take a shower, she thought to herself. He had been very kind to her thus far, and she was sure he would be fine with her using his facilities to get clean. Who knew, he might even be appreciative that she wasn't smelling like she hadn't bathed in weeks when he arrived home. The bathroom was very basic and small, not that Yugito expected it to be large or anything. Her bathroom back in Kumogakure had been even smaller. It had all the basics, a toilet and sink situated next to each other. The sink was pressed up against a wall that stuck out of the room and stopped about 1/3 of the way in, revealing a small entrance where the bath most likely was. On the wall opposite the toilet was a towel rack with several fluffy orange towels hanging off of them. Yugito moved across the floor, passing through the small entrance to reveal her earlier assumptions had been right. There was a small bath, large enough to fit one person comfortably. Unlike most baths, the heating device was on the side, and a large pipe was sticking out from the top, curving up and out of the room via through the wall. Off to the side was a small stool over a drain with a wooden bucket. Walking up to the bath, Yugito turned on the faucet until a steady stream of cool blue water began pouring out. Then she turned on the heating unit, cranking up the small dial to start a fire inside of it that would heat the water. With that done, Yugito quickly made to get undressed. The first thing she took off was her shirt, the tight black shirt with a purple patch that ran along the lower part of her torso and half of her chest, slid off as she grabbed with it both hands by the hem and lifted it up. Looking at it, she noticed that it was very dirty as well. Her pants were too, and she realized that her clothes would need to be washed as well before she could wear them again. Steam soon began filling the room. Yugito hiked her thumbs under her pants and panties, and slid them down the lower half of her body. Stepping out of them, the now nude Yugito folded her clothes, quickly walked out of the bathroom. It took her a while, but she was able to eventually realize that this apartment did not have a washing machine, meaning, much to her displeasure, she would need to wash them by hand. Sighing, she went back the bathroom and decided that could wait until after she was clean. After setting her clothes on the toilet seat, she grabbed the bucket and went over to the bathtub. Sticking her hand in the water first, she deemed it hot enough and quickly filled the bucket with water. After looking around for a moment, she saw a small rack hanging on the wall filled with soap and shampoo. Both were for men, but considering this apartment belonged to a guy and she hadn't bathed in weeks, she wasn't going to be picky. Grabbing a bar of soap and a bottle of shampoo, she walked back over to the stool and drain. Setting the cleaning supply down, Yugito picked up the bucket and unceremoniously dumped the water over her head, drenching her from head to toe. After refilling the bucket with water, Yugito sat down and began washing herself. As she worked the shampoo into her hair, Yugito found herself hoping that Naruto would be out for a while so that she could get cleaned and dressed before he came home. Naruto arrived at the front door to his apartment when a thought arrived to the forefront of his mind. Yugito might still be asleep. With this in mind, the blonde wannabe Hokage cautiously and quietly turned the handle, opened the door, tiptoed in and closed the door behind him. Naruto continued to take a couple of light steps into the room just as the bathroom door swung open. Naruto was then gifted by the sight of Yugito, wrapped in nothing but a towel. Naruto was able to see a good amount of cleavage and her flawless, peach-colored skin which was now clearly visible after all the impurities had been washed away. This also brought out her beautiful, long blonde hair that came down to her mid-back and a little over each shoulder and down to her fairly well-endowed chest. While Naruto was treating himself to the spectacular view, Yugito turned her head to see him gawking at her. As soon as Naruto was seen, his position went from enjoyable to precarious. Yugito's face went through several different emotions: surprise, mortification, embarrassment, and finally, it settled on anger. Once her emotional disposition had settled on a single emotion, that being of righteous female fury, she acted out of instinct that all women are born with and did the one thing her mind told her to do: start throwing things. Whoever the moron was that came up with the idea that women were fragile, sweet creatures must have been completely insane at the time. The blonde male of the duo was soon forced to dodge the many items and objects that were being thrown at him by his female counterpart. Bars of soap and shampoo bottles soon escalated into chairs, then a mattress, and finally, a sink. Naruto cursed under his breath just before the sink collided with his chest, knocking the air out of his lungs as he burst through the closed door, over the safety railing and plummeted down to the ground below. Naruto groaned in pain as he pushed the sink off of him, cursing under his breath, again. Who do you think would be tasked with fixing that? Naruto ignored the astonished spectators that had stopped walking when he was unceremoniously thrown out of his own apartment by, of all things, a kitchen sink and stood up. Tentatively, he walked up the steps of the apartment and edged to the door. He needed to tell Yugito about his discussion with the Sandaime Hokage, but he had no desire to have anything else thrown at him. If he stepped in, he might have to deal with a stove or refrigerator flying his way next. Naruto looked down at the caved-in door and cursed yet again. Who do you think would be tasked with replacing that? Naruto sighed out of self-pity, but he wasn't one to wallow in it for too long as he quickly recovered. Normally, he would have just walked in and demanded some respect in his own abode. After all, this was his apartment, and he was letting Yugito stay there. Honestly, she shouldn't have been so angry. It's not like it was his fault she had walked out of his bathroom covered in nothing but a towel. Still, there was something about an enraged woman that made him think twice. Some form of self-preservation instincts that told him waltzing in and demanding respect would be more troublesome than it was worth. Within the Nara compound, both Shikamaru and his father, Shikaku, sneezed. They rubbed their nose, simultaneously muttered troublesome, then went back to their game of shogi. Naruto cupped his chin, closing his eyes as he contemplated what his next course of action should be. His objective was to be able to enter his own apartment with having to endure the least amount of physical damage to himself and his wallet. Naruto, who could be considered mentally inept during the best of times, came up with a complete blank. So he did what he did best, he winged it. Naruto closed his eyes and held his hands in front of him as he slowly walked in. "I'm not looking. Just please, don't throw anything else." Naruto instantly pleaded as he felt a blast of killing intent hit him as soon as he entered the apartment. "Don't you knock before you open doors." Yugito shouted as Naruto heard and partially felt a knife just nearly embed itself in his skull, but instead punctured the wall just behind him. What Naruto felt like saying in response was, "This is my goddamn house, so I don't need to goddamn knock." Dat bayo. However, even the small spec processor he called a brain knew that would be a bad idea. Instead of saying what he wanted to say, he said, "I thought you were sleeping and I didn't want to wake you up. I didn't know you were taking a bath." Yugito had to admit that his defense was reasonable enough. Truthfully, she felt a small amount of shame and gratitude towards him. It wasn't exactly his fault that he had come in just as she was getting out of the shower. Not that she would tell him that. Sighing, she slowly placed the set of sharp kitchen utensils on a nearby table. "I'll let you off this time, but next time you won't be so lucky. Just wait outside and let me get dressed. It'll only take a minute," Yugito stated. Naruto gulped at the threat from the blonde-haired girl as he scurried out of the door and did as he was told, leaning against the wall as he waited for Yugito. Shikamaru always said that women were a drag. Point proven, Naruto thought to himself as he sighed, leaned against the wall and slid down until he was on his butt. He looked up at the sky and shuddered, somehow feeling as if he just escaped the Shinigami's grasp. Naruto learned something else about women that morning. They take forever to get dressed. Naruto was kept waiting outside so long that he actually fell asleep and was snoozing like a baby by the time Yugito finally walked out. "Naruto, you wanted to talk to me about something?" Yugito inquired of the boy, lightly shaking him. What is it?" Naruto's shouting got increasingly louder as he jumped out of his sleep, a kunai in hand, acting as if they were being ambushed before Naruto got a clear grasp of where he was and he recollected what happened before he dozed off. "Took you long enough," Naruto complained, replacing the kunai in his holster. Yugito looked at him with a raised eyebrow, then looked at the holster that he had placed the kunai in, then back to him. For once, Naruto understood the look, but he just sighed and made a gesture that told her to forget it. "I went to Gigi." He trailed off when he noticed her blank stare. It took him a moment to realize that she probably didn't know who Gigi was. Thus, he quickly elaborated with, "He's the Hokage, and I told him about you. I asked him if you could stay and he said somebody was going to come and interview you and then you could stay. Isn't that great?" Naruto explained, exclaiming the last part in joy of having his new friend stay in Konoha, despite her seemingly violent nature. Yugito knew of the rather troubled relationship between Konoha and Kumo, so she was both relieved and ecstatic to hear that she was not being instantly expelled from the village like she had believed would happen if the day came that far too many ninja of this village found out that she was from Kumogakure. She had planned on telling Naruto to keep it a secret, but it was too late and it apparently didn't matter anyways. She was being given a chance to settle in a new village and all she had to do was answer a few questions. How hard could that be? "How about we go celebrate with something to eat? You're still hungry, right?" Naruto inquired of the girl for the reason he had verbally stated. There was also the small fact that he was hungry, having not eaten much for breakfast since he gave most of his food to Yugito, and if he didn't get a few bowls of ramen in his system now, he just knew he was going to die. "I am pretty hungry. Do you have a place in mind?" Yugito questioned calmly, but that didn't stop Naruto from giving a loud response. Hell yeah, I have a place in mind. Naruto shouted victoriously, pumping a fist into the air with childlike enthusiasm. He grabbed Yugito by the hand, eliciting a very small blush from the girl who was not all that used to human contact. However, after a few moments of being pulled along by the enthusiastic whisker-marked blonde, she got used to, and even enjoyed the small amount of physical contact. She moved her legs quickly to catch up so she wasn't dragging along behind him, laughing a bit at the expression of childish joy on her fellow blonde's face. It only took a minute with Naruto's insane hunger to arrive at the small, opened eatery. Ichiraku Ramen was a very small wooden stand with a flap hanging over the entrance. Despite its old and semi-worn look, the heavenly aroma that wafted from the place negated any reservations Yugito might have had about the place. Without pausing, Naruto walked in and took his seat. Yugito followed close behind, taking the seat right next to him just as the owner of Ichiraku Ramen turned around to see who had entered his establishment. The man, who looked to be in his mid to late 40s, wearing a faded white shirt, blue jeans and a slightly dirty apron with a chef's hat on his head, was pleasantly surprised to see his favorite customer sitting in his usual seat, but what caught the shopkeeper's attention was the blonde-haired girl sitting right next to him. Was Naruto making friends after being alone for so long? A warm smile came upon Tuchi's face as he greeted the short, blonde boy, Naruto. It's good to see you again. Soon after this greeting, which was returned by an equally happy one from Naruto, the chef questioned Naruto about his new acquaintance. Who's your new friend, Naruto? Oh yeah, this is Yugito ni. Yugito, this is Ji-san. Naruto introduced Tuchi to Yugito and vice versa. Yugito had instantly wished that Naruto told her the elderly man's real name since she didn't feel comfortable with referring to this friendly stranger as Gramps. It sounded rude and disrespectful to call an older person by that, but it seemed that the ramen maker did not mind at all and perhaps even enjoyed being spoken to in such a familiar name. It's nice to meet you, Yugito. Tuchi spoke to the young, blonde-haired girl in a warm voice. It was the kind Yugito would have expected in a grandfatherly figure, something she had not experienced. She quickly gave him a similar greeting as the man began preparing a couple bowls that he would pour ramen into. Naruto visited the ramen shop so frequently that it was no longer necessary for him to tell Tuchi what he wanted as it was the same every time. What is it that you would like to eat? This may be Ichiraku Ramen, but we don't only serve ramen, the shop owner explained shortly to the girl who thought about it for a moment. Do you, by any chance, serve tekudon? Yugito asked politely, not even bothering to bring her hopes up as she knew that a ramen shop most likely did not contain the rice, raw tuna and special spices that were in the dish she liked. I'm sorry, but we don't serve tekudon here, Tuchi apologized, but also made a small mental note to possibly begin making it. If this girl was really Naruto's friend, then she would possibly be visiting Ichiraku Ramen frequently and it would be a wise choice to begin making tekudon. Yugito looked to her left to see that Naruto had gone through already 2 bowls of ramen and was still going strong as Tuchi placed fresh bowl after fresh bowl in front of him. If Naruto was eating it like that, then the food must have been something special. Can I get what Naruto is eating? Yugito questioned the old man who nodded with a smile. Nobody could eat ramen as passionately as Naruto, but Tuchi's ramen was delicious. Yugito was at first hesitant to try it before the hunger that she had felt through those weeks of travel came to her like a slap to the face and she began to chow down at a speed that rivaled Naruto's. No matter how hungry someone was, they could not eat ramen of all things, faster than Naruto could. Heck, it was nearly impossible to eat anything faster than Naruto. At the end of 30 minutes, 40 bowls of ramen were piled high. 15 were Yugito's and the other 25 belonged to Naruto. How much do I owe you, Ji-san? Naruto questioned the old man who told Naruto that it was all on the house. Tuchi was happy to see that Naruto was making friends and decided not to have Naruto pay this time around. His income would take a somewhat sizable decline, but Naruto was almost like a son to him. Really? Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Jii-san. Naruto thanked the man ecstatically to the point where it could most likely be heard throughout Konoha. Yugito thanked the man as well, but a lot more politely and quietly than Naruto, though she couldn't help but giggle slightly at her fellow blonde's rambunctious and overly enthusiastic way of thanking someone. Tucci, who was pretty much used to Naruto's way of acting, just chuckled and waved the thanks off. Walking out of Ichiraku Ramen, the two blondes took a couple steps before Yugito stopped them with a question. Where are we going now? That's a good question, Naruto stated loudly, causing Yugito to sweat drop. He didn't really have any plans on where they should go, reacting more on impulse than any logical thought process or thinking period. How? Naruto-like. Meanwhile, Naruto was deep in thought as he closed his eyes and made a face as he began to think of an idea on what they should do. Yugito giggled as Naruto's expression went shortly from a calm thinking one to a straining look that made Naruto seem as if he was constipated in his crouched position. It was only a minute later when Naruto finally had his eureka moment, jumping high into the air as he pumped his fists, shouting, "I got it! Since you're going to be living in this village, I should show you around, right?" Naruto stated in a voice that showed he was praising himself, causing Yugito to laugh. Naruto looked at her for a moment, wondering if she was laughing at him. But seeing the smile on her face that she was sending his way made it so that, even if she was laughing at him, it wouldn't have mattered. The number of people who smiled his way could be counted on one hand. The smile she was giving him, which he absently noted made her more beautiful than ever before, made his world that much brighter than it had been minutes before. "Alright," he determined, grabbing Yugito's hand, which this time was grabbed back as the girl was getting used to him acting on what was most likely instincts. "Let's go." Yugito couldn't help but mirror Naruto's grin as the whiskered blonde began dragging her off to their first destination. The first place Naruto thought important to tell Yugito about was the Hokage residence, which was probably the most important building in all of Konoha. It was where missions were assigned, where orders were given, where the Hokage stayed, and where other important operations were carried out. The central hub of Konoha, as it were. "This building here is where the Hokage stays," Naruto explained rather vaguely despite its actual importance as he instantly moved, Yugito lingering a step behind as she looked at the massive red structure with the kanji of Hai no Kuni inscribed in the middle of a large circle that protruded out of the building. "Let's go, Yugito. We're burning daylight and there's still a lot of stuff to see," Naruto remarked in his usual, loud way. Yugito snapped out of her awe and caught up with him as they walked towards Naruto's next destination. "And this is my least favorite place in the entire village," Naruto spoke in complete disgust about the next building, emphasizing the word, entire. "But it's a hospital," Yugito responded without having to be told what the building was used for. Hospitals were pretty much universal in how they looked. White walls, lots of windows on the side where patient rooms would be, and a large glass sliding door. The fact that there was a large sign with the kanji for hospital on the front simply made what the place was used for all the more obvious. "Exactly," was Naruto's only reply as he began to leave. Yugito followed right behind and sweat dropped as she caught his silent murmurs of white-clad devils, stone-like beds, and thousands of tools that would be the death of him. As Naruto and Yugito walked through the streets of Konoha, the blonde young boy pointed out a couple stores and convenient department stores that catered to every shinobi's and villager's needs, from clothes and food, to weaponry and scrolls. As Naruto continued talking about some of the more important department stores, he almost did not catch on to the fact that Yugito wasn't paying attention anymore. Something else had caught her eye, but Naruto decided to just continue with the tour until he decided she needed to be snapped out of it. What had caught Yugito's eye, however, was not an item of the many department stores, something in the sky above, or something on the ground below. What had caught Yugito's attention were the villagers that surrounded her and Naruto. The eyes of these villagers were fixated in one direction and they carried an overflowing amount of anger and disgust, while some villagers' eyes held fear and worry, as if their life could be in danger at any second. Those eyes full of fury wished their target 1,000 painful deaths, while those with fear wished his very existence away. Those eyes scorned and feared their target at highs that she had never before seen. Yugito was but only a second from cowering behind Naruto. Back in her village, she was treated much the same way, but what she was experiencing here was 10 times worse. This exceeded anything she had ever experienced. Was she wrong about Konoha being a safe haven? It took a minute or two before Yugito finally managed to note that the scornful glares were not aimed at her, but at the blonde-haired boy in front of her, who was still calmly walking through the streets and talking to Yugito as if he didn't have every single villager they passed staring at him with hateful and distrusting glances. How could he ignore the stares he was receiving like that? A storm of questions instantaneously brewed within Yugito's mind. Why did they hate Naruto? What did Naruto do? Why were they afraid of Naruto? What did Naruto do? Why hadn't Naruto noticed those eyes yet? Yugito's efforts to answer all of these questions were in vain as they only multiplied and succeeded in frying her mind from overuse. This was quite the puzzle and one that she wanted to solve. She had come up with one possible solution, but the chances that it was the answer were extremely slim to the point where it was non-existent. Yugito was finally snapped out of her silent contemplation by the tone of Naruto's worried voice. "Are you okay, Yugito?" "Yeah, I'm fine. What were you saying?" Yugito assured Naruto, who had a worried look in his eyes. The male of the group frowned as he looked at her, trying to see if something was wrong. Yugito squirmed a bit. His eyes could be surprisingly piercing when they wanted to be. However, after a moment or two the whiskered blonde couldn't seem to find anything wrong with his new friend. He nodded, then got back to the topic he had been trying to discuss with her. "I was just telling you about the academy and asked if you wanted to be a kunoichi?" Naruto repeated as the memories of what happened early that afternoon came to him. Yugito had really good aim with that knife, and those bottles of shampoo, the soap, the mattress, the sink. He shuddered. Naruto sighed, once again in self-pity as he remembered he had to make a couple home improvements when he returned that day. This moment of regret caused Naruto to miss Yugito's answer and therefore give the blonde the wrong message. "Is there something wrong with that?" Yugito inquired of Naruto upon hearing him sigh, with a voice of slowly building anger that showed she was offended. "Wait, what? Huh? I'm confused?" Naruto babbled like an idiot at Yugito's seemingly spontaneous fury in both fear and confusion at what had brought it on. "I just told you that I do plan on becoming a kunoichi and you sighed." Yugito accused vehemently, wondering why that got Naruto upset. Did he think she was incapable of becoming one? Did he think she was too weak, because she wouldn't think twice about proving him wrong? Even if she was not in her home village anymore, she would still become a strong and proud kunoichi and nobody was about to take that away from her. Naruto shook his head vigorously as he waved his hands in front of him, trying to show his innocence. "You got it all wrong. I was just thinking about something else and I wasn't paying attention to your answer." Naruto's mood went from fearful to bright and cheerful upon remembering her answer. "That's right. You said you were going to be a kunoichi. That's great. That means that we can go to the same school and I think there's an open seat in my class. That means we could be in the same class. That would be so cool." Naruto's cheerful attitude only increased as he began hyping himself up even more. Yugito's sweat dropped for a moment, almost not believing it was possible for someone to be as happy as the spiky-headed blonde. Still, she couldn't help but find Naruto's happy-go-lucky attitude to be both comical and relieving after being on the road for so long. Almost like a nice refreshing breeze on a hot summer's day. Yugito could not remember a day she had ever laughed so much, or had ever felt this happy and at peace. Naruto was someone special, she was beginning to realize, and Yugito knew that she was extremely lucky to have met him. As Naruto slowly began to calm down, the two blondes noticed that the sun had begun to set, turning the sky a brilliant orange mixed with reds and purples. "We should go back home, it's getting late," Yugito suggested to Naruto, who had a contemplative look on his face. Yugito was slowly reaching over to Naruto to check if he was okay when, after several more seconds, the blonde still had yet to respond to her question. Considering he had just been shouting like a hyperactive little kid, the silence was beginning to get disturbing. Yugito stopped her progress when she heard Naruto speak in an almost uncharacteristically calm, cool voice. "I want to show you my favorite place in Konoha before we go." Favorite place? Yugito couldn't help but wonder where her new friend's favorite place was, and how it could bring such a calm look to the normally hyperactive blonde. Naruto held a firm hand down to Yugito to help her up a rather large climb, grabbing the hand she held out and pulling her up to the final ledge. Yugito lightly dusted herself off upon completing the hike. She didn't know why they went through all this trouble to get to one place, but when she looked up, her expression went from one of idle curiosity into one of sheer awe. Naruto let a small smirk grace his lips when he saw the expression on Yugito's beautiful and glowing features. Naruto remembered when he first decided to come up to this spot, and when he had finally succeeded in making the climb, he had the same expression on his face as Yugito did. They stood on top of the Hokage monument, which was the highest point in all of Konoha. More specifically, they were standing on the head of the Yondaime Hokage, Namikaze Minato, who had led the village for quite some time till his death, in which the position was once again occupied by the Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen. He looked out at the horizon. The orange, reds and purples set the sky and treeline below on fire. A beautiful sight, and one of the reasons Hai no Kuni had been given its name, the Land of Fire. Beautiful, isn't it? Naruto commented in that same, strange, calm tone that grabbed Yugito's attention. She looked over at him, noting the peaceful look on his face. What was it that made Naruto so different from how he usually was? Was it the scenery that made Naruto look like a man at peace, or just the situation? Probably a bit of both. It's amazing, Yugito said in an almost silent gasp, her eyes going back to the sky. Naruto's small smirk turned into a warm smile as he lightly held her by the wrist and led her till they were right on top of the head. Naruto proceeded to lay on the ground as he looked over to see Yugito's eyes were still firmly planted on the sky. Grabbing her hand, he directed her attention to him with a gentle tug. She looked down at him and he tugged again. It took her a second, but she soon got the hint and lay down next to him. One of these days, I want to have my head right next to this one, Naruto remarked slightly offhandedly, Yugito looking back down at him in slight amazement. She remembered Naruto mentioning that the monument had the heads of all the Hokage imprinted on it. You want to become Hokage? Yugito asked in amazement at the seemingly impossible goal. Out of the thousands of ninja in the village, only a select few were ever even considered for the position. The Kage of any one of the 5 major ninja villages were the most powerful of their respective home. To get to that position, you had to become stronger than anyone else in your village. Gaining such a prestigious title required more work and dedication than most people were ever willing to give. The whiskered blonde's response came in the form of a nod and a warm smile on his face that Yugito found very comforting. I know you saw how the villagers treat me here, and to be honest, I don't know why they hate me, Naruto began. An astonished look appeared on Yugito's face. Had he always been this perceptive and just acted ignorant? Or was there something more to the blonde's ability to read the situation? But that's why I want to become the next Hokage. I want to be somebody important that everybody respects and acknowledges as someone great. I want everybody to think of me as important to the village. Naruto explained his goal with a certain air about him that made you want to believe that he would accomplish that goal one day. Listening to him, Yugito couldn't help but hope he did eventually become Hokage. Gigi always told me stories of how the Yondaime Hokage was one of the greatest Hokages and about how he was so widely respected and known throughout the village and the world. Gigi told me that he died for Konoha the day I was born, Naruto commented with a strange, sad smile as silence overcame the two, Yugito hanging on every word that Naruto was saying. To see Naruto acting so mature when he had acted like a child on a sugar high the entire day made this a rare and interesting event. I want to become just like him one day, Naruto finished with a smile as he took one last deep breath and relaxed against the fourth's head, looking up at the sky as his eyes slowly closed and he dozed off into a peaceful slumber. Yugito, however, was still awake and was looking down on Naruto's peacefully sleeping form as she supported herself on one elbow, watching as the moonlight seemed to dance on his features with a soft smile on her face. I couldn't have met a better person, I'm sure of it now. He's so different and special in his own way. He's brash, loud and childish, yet can be calm, quiet and mature. He always manages to make me laugh, and despite how hurt he is by how everybody treats him, he manages to keep a smile on his face and ignores it. I was never that strong, Yugito thought as she unconsciously brought a hand up and began running it through Naruto's golden blonde locks. His hair was soft, she mused, almost like fur. Laying down on her side, so that she could still look at Naruto's sleeping face, Yugito said, I'm really glad I met you, Naruto. Her voice a mere whisper that was lost on the wind. Soon, the peaceful atmosphere that had overcome the area began to lull Yugito into a sense of security. Her eyes slowly fell closed, and her breathing evened out, as she too fell asleep. Naruto drowsily opened his eyes only to be blinded by the morning rays of the rising sun that shone across the horizon. The radiance of the sun after the darkness of the night seemed to signal the awakening of the world as Naruto was instantly greeted by the sound of chirping and chattering wildlife, the rushing waters of a nearby river and the light sound of the wind sweeping across the barren streets of Konoha and through the trees surrounding the village. A small smile of relaxation appeared on Naruto's face as he drew his arm over his eyes to shield them from the beams of light, feeling as it heated the fabric of his clothing. Naruto let out a content sigh only to feel it slightly restricted by a warm weight that he just realized was on his mid-chest. Naruto felt tempted to check what it was, but he weighed that the value of his relaxation was far greater than his curiosity. Naruto would have been able to ignore this soft pressure on his chest, but then, it moved. Naruto's curiosity went from ignorable to unbearable as he could no longer contain himself. Naruto's eyes flew open as he bent his head towards his chest to get a good look at what had interrupted him from one of his more enjoyable hobbies. The somnolent blonde instantly regretted this action as his eyes were left vulnerable to the unrelenting light rays of the sun. Naruto groaned in annoyance as he blinked rapidly, allowing his eyes time to adjust. As Naruto's eyes adjusted, the preliminary blur he saw began to take shape. When Naruto finally got a clear picture, a deep, scarlet blush tainted his cheeks almost instantaneously. The warm weight that was laid out on his chest turned out to be, unexpectedly enough, Yugito. Yugito was facing Naruto, giving the blonde boy a view that showcased her beauty. Yugito was coated in an ethereal glow as the sun shone on her back, bringing out the natural shine to her hair, the creamy, peach color to her skin and her pink lips which were ever so slightly parted to reveal a small bit of her bright white teeth. Naruto's eyes then moved onto her body which he noticed was rather curvaceous under her clothing for her age. Naruto noticed Yugito's toned muscles that came from training to be a kunoichi and as he looked at her arms, he trailed one of them up to the hand, only to see that it was entangled in his hair. Naruto gulped as he realized their close proximity and the blush that stained his cheeks grew a few shades darker as his mind wandered. When he finally did manage to come to his senses, he found himself extremely confused about how he should feel about his predicament. A part of him said that he should just lay back and enjoy the moment, while another part told him to try and retreat as quickly as he could. Naruto had just recently discovered how women reacted when they were put in an uncomfortable position, and if Yugito was to wake up and found herself this close to him, she could possibly maim him. Even if Naruto desired to remove Yugito off of him, the last thing he wanted to do was suddenly wake her up from her peaceful slumber. Judgment was already being passed before Naruto could come to a decision as Yugito's eyes fluttered open. Naruto's breathing hitched in fear as Yugito rubbed the remaining sleep from her eyes, letting off a tired yawn before her gaze fell on Naruto. What happened next was unexpected by the both of them as Naruto found himself momentarily mesmerized by Yugito's cat-like, beautiful purple eyes while Yugito was hypnotized by Naruto's deep blue ones. They remained in this stasis position for a good couple minutes before they finally snapped themselves out of it and finally brought their attention back to the position they were in. Yugito's body was still pressed onto Naruto's and their faces were only a couple inches apart, probably less. Yugito hastily removed herself off of Naruto while Naruto scooted slightly away from her, both of them clearing their throats loudly and awkwardly. Yeah. Good morning, Yugito, Naruto managed to say in a calm, steady voice that betrayed any sign of how erratically his heart was beating. Good morning to you too, Naruto. Yugito mentally cursed herself for stuttering as it showed how affected she was by what had just occurred. An uncomfortable silence came upon the two soon after, neither knowing what to say. So, what do you want to do today? Naruto spoke first, being the more confident and brash of the two. Yugito was mentally thankful that Naruto had decided to speak first, but his question left her with a complete blank as she shrugged in response, not yet trusting her voice to come through for her. I don't know about you, but I'm starving, Naruto commented just before his stomach growled, which only emphasized his point as he jumped to his feet. Naruto was so focused on the streets of Konoha below that he did not notice the surprised look that came upon Yugito's face. Yugito knew that they had not technically eaten in a while, having been asleep, but for someone to be hungry as soon as they woke up was weird frankly. Yugito had to admit that she had a rather large appetite, but unlike Naruto, hers took some time to set in after waking up. What Yugito heard next made her wonder about Naruto's diet. Ichiraku Ramen, here I come. Naruto shouted to the heavens upon seeing his favorite shop open up, using his keen, superhuman sense of sight. The ecstatic blonde boy began bounding down the back of the Hokage monument and, in his happy, single-minded goal to get ramen, forgot about Yugito. Naruto, wait for me. Yugito whined with a surprised expression as she began to leap from ledge to ledge just as Naruto had, using their academy-level training. Tucci took a deep breath of the crisp morning air as he unlatched the lock that kept the rusty iron curtain in place before lifting the curtain up. How long had he been in business? Far longer than I can remember, Tucci mused to himself as he stepped in and behind the counter, arranging the appliances for the new business day. Ichiraku Ramen, here I come. A warm smile appeared on Tucci's face as he instantly recognized the voice and traced it to the Hokage monument where the old man's eyes settled on the Yondaime Hokage's head. A nostalgic smile came upon the old man's face as he remembered a young Minato Namikaze constantly visiting his store. Now the old chef had a similar-looking blonde as a regular customer. Maybe that was why he gave Naruto a chance when nobody else in the village would. While Tucci was in his silent contemplations, he nearly missed the entrance of Naruto and Yugito, who took the same seats as yesterday and greeted the old man. Snapping himself back to the present, Tucci greeted the blonde duo, "Good morning, Naruto, Yugito. I assume it will be the same as yesterday?" The inquiry was meant more for Yugito since Naruto was definitely going to order the same thing. Yugito's response came in the form of a nod and a small smile. "Good. One moment and I'll get started," the elderly shopkeeper stated as he retreated to the supply room in the back to retrieve the ingredients he would need to concoct fresh bowls of ramen. Yugito remained silent until she was positive the owner of Ichiraku Ramen would be unable to hear her before she turned to Naruto and spoke in a whisper. "Is ramen all you ever eat?" Yugito found Naruto's eating habit extremely unhealthy and wanted to talk to him about it, but if Tucci heard her, he might be falsely led into believing that she did not enjoy his food, which was actually far from the truth. Ichiraku Ramen's ramen was the best ramen she had ever tasted in her life. Naruto scarcely gave the question a moment's thought before he answered it with a huge grin and a cheerful tone, "Yep." Yugito chuckled lightly at his response as she decided to simply drop it since, in the end, she was no better. Back in Kumogakure, there was a sushi bar that looked much like Ichiraku Ramen and she used to engorge in their tekudon. Yugito giggled to herself when she thought about the insane levels of food she and Naruto ate and how little weight they put on, if any at all. When Tucci had finally made 4 dozen bowls of ramen, he proceeded to place the dish in front of the duo only to experience a feeling of déjà vu as he watched the saucers disappear one by one as the blonde scarfed it down, hardly chewing between each mouthful. In an unbelievably small amount of time, ramen bowls were once again piled high into the air, blocking Tucci's view of his favorite customer and his new friend. Naruto and Yugito patted their stomachs with a content smile on their faces. "So, how much do I owe you, Ji-san?" Naruto repeated the same question he usually asked when he finished his meals at Ichiraku Ramen. "Don't worry about it, Naruto. It's on the house today as well," Tucci assured the blonde, who once again erupted into a loud series of thank yous that the old shopkeeper waved off until Naruto and Yugito left with a wave of goodbyes. Yugito had to say that the generosity of the elderly cook was shocking to her, but it also gave her a warm feeling in her heart when she realized that some people really did care for Naruto. Instead of asking Yugito where she wanted to go before planning a destination like what usually happened, Naruto seemed to have a place already in mind as he began walking in a predetermined direction without a word. Yugito followed close behind, curious of where Naruto was going as she questioned him about it. "So Naruto, where are we going?" "I have to stop by my apartment to repair a sink and replace a door that a certain somebody broke," Naruto commented, stressing the second to last word in the sentence with a clear undertone of annoyance. Yugito got the message as a blush formed on her cheeks, feeling embarrassed and a little bit ashamed of what she had done. She was not versed in the way of the handyman, so she would not be able to help Naruto in his home improvements. Naruto arrived in front of his apartment to find the battered sink embedded in the ground where he had left it. "You can wait inside, Yugito. I'll be right up after I get a few things I need," Naruto suggested, deciding not to make Yugito feel bad for putting him through this labor. Naruto had sensed her down mood since he had commented on the repairs and decided to stop after that. Yugito nodded as she quietly walked up the stairs to the open entrance of the abode, deciding to stay out of Naruto's way until he had completed his task. Naruto sighed at Yugito's depressing mood, but decided to worry about it later as he pulled out a small set of keys and proceeded to go down a couple steps under the apartment where there was one rusty, metallic door that led to the basement. Naruto inserted the key into the lock and with one turn and a resounding click, the creaky door flew open as Naruto flipped on the light switch. This basement contained a vast array of tools, pieces of wood in a variety of sizes, screws of different lengths, certain spare home features, a large collection of cleaning supplies and in the very back, an enormous amount of different color paint. Naruto placed the keys back into his front pocket as he stepped into the medium-sized basement and began to scan the many shelves for what he would need. First, he retrieved a box that contained an assortment of tools from the bottom shelf and carried it by its convenient handle. Naruto then walked to the cluster of screws and took a couple boxes of different lengths and placed it within the toolbox before delving deeper into the underground room. Naruto browsed through the different dimensions of wood until he found a spare door made for his apartment. Finally, carrying the replacement door under his free arm, Naruto retreated to the back of the basement and took a can of paint that had the same color as his walls and held it by clenching his teeth on the handle before grabbing a rolling brush and a tray. Having collected everything he would need, Naruto stepped out of the basement and closed the door behind him, not bothering to lock it as he would have to return the remainders of the supplies later. Soon after stepping back onto the streets of Konoha after exiting the basement, Naruto walked over to the disassembled sink and using his foot, launched it into the air and caught it on his back. Now having completely everything on his person, Naruto tediously walked up the steps, straining himself not to drop anything since his arm span was not as long as he would have liked it to be. In about a minute or so, Naruto walked back into his apartment and began to set down everything he needed on the ground one by one as Yugito watched in amazement, finding it surprising that Naruto could carry so much in one trip given his rather small stature. Although she did not say anything to him about it, Naruto was on the short side, being shorter than even she was. Before beginning the process of fixing the sink or door, Naruto stepped out of his apartment and grabbed the dented door before launching it, with accurate precision, into the decayed dumpster against the complex's sidewall. Satisfied when he heard the sharp clang of wood hitting metal, Naruto strolled back inside and grabbed the toolbox and detached sink as he walked into the kitchen area. Naruto inserted the sink back into the slot in the counter that it had been ripped out of and using 4 screws and a hammer, fastened it back into the counter so it would not be easily ripped out again. Naruto proceeded to replace the hammer and screws back in the box before taking out a wrench and bending down to get under the sink where he aligned and attached the severed pipelines. After about 10 to 20 minutes of working on the pipes, Naruto exhaled deeply as he wiped a few droplets of sweat off his brow as he turned on the sink and watched with a sense of pride and achievement as water streamed out of the faucet undisturbed. Naruto continued to place his hands under the flowing water as he splashed the cold liquid on his face, refreshing himself to begin repairing the door. An impressed expression came upon Yugito's face as she looked at the repaired sink, thinking to herself how capable of a person Naruto actually was. Naruto, after rejuvenating himself with the cool tap water, returned to his work, replacing the wrench in the toolbox before carrying it back to the other supplies. Leaving the toolbox open, Naruto took the spare door and with some difficulty and a couple minutes, managed to place it perfectly within the opening and using a screwdriver, a hammer and a couple screws, fastened the hinges to the door. Naruto tested the door by opening and closing it repeatedly. Seeing that the door had been properly situated, Naruto strode to the kitchen, grabbed a large roll of paper towels and began to cover the ground near the door with it so that the few droplet of paint that would drip to the ground would not hit the wooden floor. Having prepared everything, Naruto finally decided that he should begin painting as he popped up the lid and began to pour the thick liquid into the tin tray. The blonde handyman followed to dab his brush into the dye before he began to coat the door. This paint would only require 1 layer, which was good as Naruto did not have the patience to repeat it several times. The entire procedure only took a couple minutes, but, thankfully, by the time it was completed, the door matched the color of the walls and was fully functional. Naruto had finished packing up all the tools and leftover paint and was carrying them downstairs as Yugito was once again left in awe at how Naruto had managed to make all the repairs on his own. I guess when you live alone, you have to know how to do these type of things. Seeing how the villagers treat him, he wouldn't be able to get help even if he wanted it, but he wouldn't have had to do it if I hadn't overreacted in the first place, Yugito thought as her mood once again deteriorated and she felt like a burden to her kind host. Arriving back at his apartment, after replacing the supplies back in the basement, Naruto closed the door, careful not to get paint on him, before turning around to feel more than notice Yugito's brooding. Is something wrong, Yugito? Naruto questioned worriedly. Yugito had been energetic and happy for pretty much the entire time he had met her, so seeing her like this was worrisome. I'm just a burden to you, aren't I? Yugito said in a depressed tone, her eyes taking a darker tone as she refused to look Naruto in the eye. This also kept her from seeing the expression of sheer confusion that manifested on Naruto's face. Burden. What the hell gave you that idea? Naruto demanded more than asked for an answer, finding the reason for Yugito's sadness to be infuriating. Yugito was probably Naruto's closest friend despite only knowing her for 2 days and he had never been this happy before. How could somebody that made him this happy be a burden to him? It's my fault you had to fix the door and the sink. If I hadn't overreacted, you wouldn't have had to waste your energy at all. Me being here is just causing problems for you. Yugito commented, looking Naruto straight in the eye before finishing and instantly looking away, not feeling like she could look Naruto in the eye any more than she already had. Naruto sighed in disbelief. Was that really all there was to it? Did she think a broken sink and door was a big deal? Naruto never really socialized with girls as they did their best to avoid him, but were they really this emotional about absolutely everything? Geez, and I thought, I was the stupid one. Naruto began. Yugito looking up as she was wondering where Naruto was going with this, only to see a bright smile on his face that seemed to spontaneously fill her with warmth and encouragement. You being here isn't causing problems for me. You being here is making me happier than I have ever been my entire life. Naruto told sincerely, despite how anti-social that made himself sound. Naruto was rather blunt with his way of speaking, rarely ever beating around the bush. A deep blush appeared on Yugito's cheeks as Naruto told her how important she was in his life. Her insecure feeling of remaining in Naruto's abode seemed to have been washed away as a small smile appeared on her face. Thank you, Naruto. Anytime, was Naruto's response, waving off Yugito's thank you as he didn't do anything special other than stating what was obvious to him. Naruto gave a moment's pause before continuing, it doesn't get dark for a couple more hours, so where do you want to go? Yugito looked outside to see that Naruto was in fact correct. They had woken up rather early, ate at Ichiraku Ramen for a good hour before Naruto made the repairs in about 2 hours. They still had a lot of time left, the question was how they would spend it. Yugito thought about it for a good couple minutes since it seemed Naruto didn't have anywhere special in mind and she finally came up with her answer upon looking down at her worn-out clothes. She had been on the road an extremely long time, so it was guaranteed that her clothes would get worn down. Can we go shopping for some new clothes? Yugito inquired innocently, watching Naruto flinch ever so slightly in surprise before looking at her like a deer stuck in the headlights. Is something wrong? Yugito asked worriedly, putting a hand on Naruto's arm, only to be given no response. Naruto's mind was trapped at the idea of going clothes shopping with Yugito. Although Naruto may not have had the experience directly, he had seen many males dragged to the clothing stores by women and Naruto wouldn't see them again for a couple hours. Naruto learned that day that there was a difference between how males shop and how females shop. Males walked into a store, scanned it for something they wanted to buy, found what they were looking for in little to no time, bought it and left. Females on the other hand went rack by rack, selected thousands of different types of clothing and tried every single one of them out before buying them. The worst part about it was that sometimes, the female would leave the store empty-handed, meaning all that time had been for nothing. Naruto did not want to waste his day shopping for clothes. Naruto, is something the matter? Yugito shouted, shaking Naruto more vigorously, finally getting a response from the blonde. There is no way in hell I'm going shopping for clothes. Naruto vehemently stated, causing Yugito to pout as she didn't understand why. Come on, please Naruto, if I'm going to live here, I'm going to need clothes. Please, 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 please. Yugito pleaded with the blonde-haired man who turned his back to her, his arms folded across his chest, eyes closed, showing how against it he was. Nope, I will not cave, Yugito. You can say, please, all you want. Damn, I caved, Naruto muttered as he leaned against a wooden wall, watching as Yugito browsed through the many racks of the department stores at a snail's pace. Naruto regretted ever giving Yugito a tour of Konoha, as this experience proved to be a lot more boring than he could have ever imagined. Naruto's observation of a girl shopping had been spot on. They did take forever. The blonde duo had taken a break from their shopping trip to get some food at the nearby food court, which allowed them to waste about an hour or two worth of time. Yugito then spent another hour trying to get Naruto to buy some new clothes soon after, although with no results as Naruto refused, not seeing anything wrong with the clothes he currently had. Naruto looked down at about 20 or so bags, packed tight with different types of clothing, some of which he was embarrassed to be holding. On the plus side, Naruto had to say that the clothing weren't that expensive, but they were abundant. Naruto was thankful that he hadn't paid for Ichiraku ramen the last 2 times he went, or he may have run out a lot faster than he would have expected. Naruto watched as Yugito picked another article of clothing from the rack and hooked it to her arm. Naruto already feeling his money pouch getting smaller, causing him to groan in self-pity. Naruto was so preoccupied in his own contemplation that he didn't notice another man leaning against the same wall as him in the exact same position as Naruto was in. The man was far taller than Naruto, had brown hair and had a hardened expression about him that made him look experienced. Most likely a shinobi, although by his village clothing, it was hard to tell. You caved too, the man spoke, acquiring Naruto's attention, who sighed, nodding his head in a defeated expression. You know, I used to feel the same way as you did when I first had to come here back when my wife was a friend of mine. I used to think that it was the most boring and pointless thing that I have ever done, and it was costing me money, but looking back on it, I feel stupid for ever thinking about it like that. The man spoke with a soft smile as he looked at his wife, who was currently looking through the racks as well. Naruto was curious now. What made you change your mind? The brown-haired man closed his eyes as he thought about his approach to his point. Tell me something, kid. You're with the blonde-haired girl, correct? The brown-haired man inquired, opening his eyes as he pointed at Yugito. Naruto nodded as the shinobi villager continued, look at her expression. Do you see that smile on her face? Naruto looked over at Yugito to indeed notice a small smile of happiness on her face. Naruto received a feeling of contentment that he was able to cause that by accompanying Yugito here and paying for things that she quite literally needed. The brown-haired villager saw the smile that came upon Naruto's face and assumed that his point came across as he spoke. Now you know what I mean. I was ignorant back then, but that feeling is why I come here whenever she needs me to. Besides, if you're lucky, she might reward you at the end of the day. The kind man gave Naruto a knowing smile and wink as he lightly pushed off the wall, getting ready to leave when he saw his wife motion to him that she was finished. A small blush came upon Naruto's face when he realized what the man was implying with his ending comment, but said his goodbyes to the pleasant man. It was only when the kind man had left that Naruto thought back and grasped the fact that a villager from Konoha had not been hostile towards him. This feeling was new to the blonde-haired boy, since at times it seemed that the entirety of Konoha hated him for no apparent reason, except for a select few individuals. Maybe there are a lot of nice villagers and I just haven't met them yet, or maybe that guy was a retired shinobi. The shinobi have always been a lot more nicer to me than the villagers, Naruto thought to himself as he shrugged, deciding to just drop the thought and be happy that he managed to hold a pleasant conversation with someone. When Naruto finally snapped out of this contemplation, he suddenly became aware of Yugito calling his name repetitively, Naruto. Naruto. I'm done. It took a moment for Naruto to process those few relieving words, but Naruto felt kinda conflicted after his talk with the brown-haired man. Naruto was bored out of his mind, but at the same time, the feeling of contentment that he got from seeing Yugito's smile was nice as well. Are you sure? There's no need to rush if you don't have everything, but if you're done. Naruto trailed off, a curious expression coming upon Yugito's face as she wondered what could have created this change of behavior towards his idea of shopping. I'm positive. I have everything I wanted, and besides, it'll get dark soon, Yugito pointed out, Naruto looking outside through the glass doors of the entrance to see that the sun had indeed begun to set. Naruto nodded, seeing that Yugito was sure of her decision, proceeding to the cashier where Yugito's items were quickly scanned and Naruto handed the kind lady the money that was required. Naruto took the bags from the counter to add to the collection he was already carrying and continued to walk out of the department store with Yugito. Naruto looked both ways of the street, determining the fastest route to his apartment before he was unexpectedly given a hug by Yugito. The blush on his cheeks and the feeling of surprise he experienced only increased tenfold when Yugito planted a small kiss on his cheek. "That was for keeping me company here even though you didn't want to." "Thank you," Yugito thanked the blonde-haired boy, hiding her own blush from kissing him. Naruto also attempted to hide his own blush and waved off her thank you, saying that it was no big deal. Yugito smiled at Naruto's modesty as she followed him to his apartment. Through the corner of his eyes, Naruto spotted the brown-haired man from before and turned his head slightly, acknowledging the villager's presence. The brown-haired man gave Naruto a silent thumbs up and a smile causing Naruto to look away and chuckle. "What's so funny?" Yugito asked Naruto, curious about his seemingly abrupt laughter and smile. "It's nothing, I just remember something a kind guy told me." The blondes soon arrived at their destination as they quietly walked up the stairs, simply enjoying each other's presence. Naruto removed a set of keys he carried from his pocket in preparation to open the door that he had just recently repaired. Thankfully, Naruto did not need to make a different key for this door as it used the same lock. Naruto halted his progress to his home when he took note of a middle-aged man leaning against his door, a shinobi by the looks of it. The man had long blonde hair reaching down to his back, which he wore spiky on top and ending in a long ponytail, blue-green eyes and strong facial features, which included a well-defined jawline. The man was wearing the standard Konoha flak jacket over a black outfit, complete with handguards, forehead protector and a sleeveless red coat. The man reminded Naruto of his classmates, Ino Yamanaka. "Can I help you?" Naruto questioned in a more aggressive way than he actually wanted it to sound, not liking the fact that this stranger was waiting in front of his apartment for him and his new friend. "I assure you I mean no harm. My name is Inoichi Yamanaka and I was sent here by Hokage-sama to interview Yugito ni." Inoichi introduced himself with a small formal bow, causing Naruto to relax as he remembered Ji-chan mentioning this interview. "Nice to meet you, Yamanaka-san. My name is Naruto Uzumaki." Naruto greeted the man, extending his hand towards the Yamanaka head who shook it firmly. "I am well aware. You are infamous among the shinobi ranks due to your consistent shenanigans," Inoichi remarked, although there was one other more prominent reason for Naruto's fame. The young blonde male only smiled sheepishly as he scratched the back of his head and chuckled lightly. "How about we go inside and you and Yugito can get this over with?" Naruto offered, trying to divert the attention away from him, walking past Inoichi before inserting the key into the lock and pushing open the door after an audible click. Yugito entered the small apartment after Naruto, followed by Inoichi. Naruto flicked the light switch, illuminating the room as he looked over at Inoichi. The blonde man was here to interview Yugito, so Naruto was just spectating, waiting for this whole thing to be over so that he could spend more time with Yugito. "I know this is your apartment, but I'm going to have to ask you to step outside. This interview is to be done privately," Inoichi ordered, just in case this Yugito ni was indeed a Kumogakure spy. Naruto scowled at the fact that he was yet again being sent out of his apartment. This was the second time in the past 2 days. Naruto sighed, bowing his head in defeat as he made his way to the door. It was just an interview, how long could asking a couple questions take? Inoichi watched as the door of the apartment closed before he retrieved a clipboard from inside his flak jacket and a pen from one of his pockets. Inoichi took a seat in one of the spare chairs in the square room while Yugito took a seat on the bed. Inoichi clicked his pen and jotted her name at the top of the form as he cleared his throat. "I am going to begin by asking you for some basic information. Please attempt to answer the questions to the best of your ability," Inoichi began in a professional manner. The last part was not necessary as the information was basic, but he was just following protocol. Yugito nodded, signaling that she was prepared to answer Inoichi's series of questions. The young blonde female was asked about her age, date of birth, any illness she might have or may have contracted in places outside of the village, if she had any family within the village and plenty of other questions of sort. Yugito rapidly answering them as best as she could. Upon the completion of the form, Inoichi clicked his pen and set it in the clipboard off to the side. We are making outstanding process, there is just one final checkup to this process. I trust that you have not been untruthful, but my superiors demand that I use a jutsu to check if you have lied on any of the questions I've asked you. I'm going to have to ask you to close your eyes and clear your mind. I will only be a second, Inoichi explained to the other blonde in the room who looked unsure about doing as the man asked, not feeling safe doing what this stranger told her even if he did look like a pleasant enough man. Inoichi sensed the uncertainty coming for Yugito as he spoke, I assure you that I mean no harm to you. Yugito didn't look the least bit more certain with just that simple sentence, if anything, it made her more nervous. Inoichi sighed, not really blaming Yugito for how she was feeling, but there was still a chance that she could be an enemy spy and he couldn't risk his village for the discomfort of one girl. If it will bring you peace of mind, I will allow Naruto Uzumaki to spectate. Given his nature, should anything seem wrong, he will doubtingly act. Inoichi offered the young girl who smiled and nodded in the affirmative. Inoichi rose from the wooden chair and strolled over to the door and turned the handle, which just happened to be enough to cause the eavesdropping Naruto to tumble in. Naruto groaned as he placed a hand on his injured head and slowly stood up, only to be dwarfed by Inoichi who was looking straight down at him with a raised eyebrow. Naruto turned a deep red in embarrassment, scratching his head as he looked down and away. Seeing as you were eavesdropping this entire time, I don't believe I need to inform you of anything, Inoichi pointed out, shaking his head as he retook his seat and Naruto took a spot leaning against the wall adjacent to the bed. Naruto gave Yugito a warm smile before continuing to watch the actions that would soon transpire. Well then, if everybody is prepared, let us begin, Inoichi spoke once more, Yugito nodding as she closed her eyes and emptied her mind like she was ordered, feeling the hand of Inoichi Yamanaka placed lightly on her forehead. Yugito's inner world, Inoichi slowly opened his eyes to find himself in his new surroundings, just outside the mind of Yugito Ni. Inoichi Yamanaka was in the center of a large, spherical empty room, only occupied by a huge brain. The mind reader floated over to the large brain and placed his hand on the brain. Here we go, Inoichi muttered to himself as he closed his eyes, concentrating on the information he would receive from Yugito's mind. Kaminari no Kuni, land of lightning, was a peninsula, scarred by vast amounts of mountain from which rivers flowed downstream into the sea, giving the land a beautiful oceanic view despite its rough terrain. Down below the mountains, at the outskirts of Kumogakure, grew a rare forest that only increased the variety of wildlife located within the land. It was a tranquil night in the forest bordering Kumogakure down below, the full moon above and scattered stars illuminating the land below. The air was filled with the chirping, chattering and hooting of wildlife, the sound of rushing rivers and crashing waterfalls which was amplified as it echoed through the mountain chains which encircled everything. In these woods below, Yugito could be seen, stealthily leaping from tree to tree in a blur, trying to hide the tears in her eyes and stifling any cry that passed her lips. Her mind was a completely mess as she tried to focus on what was in front of her and her ultimate goal. It appeared that she was making great, unhindered progress when a massive figure a couple times her size appeared in front of her, cutting off her steady progress away from Kumogakure. Where do you think you're running off to? The large man spoke in an angry tone as he took a step forward, right into the moonlight. He was a tall, dark-skinned man with a highly muscular build, white combed back hair, a small mustache and a beard. The man wore the yellow and white robes of the Raikage, gold bracelets on each wrist and a gold belt around his waist with a boar's face engraved in the center. Black Fuma shurikens were tattooed on both his shoulders underneath the garb which he wore not shirt underneath. All these aspects gave the Raikage the appearance of a professional wrestler. I don't know, but I'll go anywhere than back there, Yugito shouted, tears still in her eyes as she pointed in the direction of Kumogakure. Although it was completely pointless, Yugito stood her ground against her pursuer, despite the fact that he was the Yondaime Raikage, the one considered to be the fastest man alive after the passing of the Yondaime Hokage. You don't have a choice in this matter, Yugito. You are too valuable to the village for me to let you go and I will forcefully take you back if I must. Threatened, taking one step towards Yugito who did not move from her position, but pulled a kunai from her holster and held it to her own throat. The Raikage stopped his progress towards Yugito and even took a step back, his eyes widened in surprise. "If you're going to make me go back there, then I might as well die here," Yugito yelled, new tears streaming down her cheeks as she put more pressure on the kunai, drawing a small amount of blood as proof that she was completely serious with going through suicide if need be. "Yugito," was the only words that left the Raikage's mouth, too stunned to say anything else. The Raikage was a man who would stand behind his beliefs no matter what happened, and he believed that a Jinchuriki was nothing more than a weapon to be used by the village. But Yugito was family, he couldn't just let her die, let alone commit suicide. Ever since Mom and Dad died, everything went straight to hell. When Mom and Dad was around, everything was easier to bear, but since they left, the villagers have been treating me worse and worse. I barely have any friends, and anybody that's not my friend either completely ignores me or hates me from the deepest parts of their hearts. I can't take it anymore. I know Kurabi is the same as me and the villagers like him, but I'm not like him. He's the perfect host, I'm not." Yugito vented with tears flowing down her cheeks, off her chin and onto the kunai blade, mixing with the droplets of blood from her throat. Yugito slowly began to get herself under control as she spoke almost inaudibly, sniffling in the middle of her sentence, "So please, step aside and let me go." A million thoughts and questions ran through his mind and he did not have the time to think them through. He couldn't let one of Kumogakure's greatest assets leave the village, but he did not want his niece to die. On one hand, he couldn't let one of Kumogakure's greatest assets in the making leave the village, but he also did not wish to have somebody so close to him die so suddenly. I had always hoped to be there to watch Yugito become a proud kunoichi and possibly even settle down with somebody and have a family. I'm the Raikage first, goddammit, it cursed himself, annoyed that his own bleeding heart was keeping him from doing what was best for his village. With his new mindset, a thought through his options. He could attempt to take Yugito back to Kumogakure, but she would soon find an opening to kill herself, and if he kept her on lockdown, she would no longer be an asset to Kumogakure. The other option was to let her go, maybe let her cool down and get her back on another day. Why am I lying to myself? There is another option. I could kill her and reseal the Nibi in a different person, the Raikage thought, sighing at the idea of having her killed. Even if it wasn't by his own hand, it was by his orders, and that still left him with blood on his hands. But if I was to kill her, I wouldn't know when the Nibi would appear again, and if it was to appear it would cause mass destruction in my village. I can't let that happen. My best bet is to let her go and hopefully get her back another day. In terms of military power, we still have B, the Raikage finally decided, once again returning back to the situation at hand, noticing that Yugito was waiting for his decision. I had to give persuading Yugito another try, so you're just going to leave everything behind. You're going to leave Kurabi, Darui, Samui, Omoi, Kurai and me too. What are you going to do on the run by yourself? You think somebody will just pick you off the streets and make your life happy? That's not how it's going to work. If you run, you could die out there. I know it's not going to be easy and I'm going to miss everybody a lot. I really will, but this is something I have to do, Yugito assured him, her voice nearly failing her as she would deeply miss everybody the Raikage had just mentioned. Very well then, if this is your decision, I will not stop you. You will be missed, finished, turning away from Yugito as one manly tear fell from his right eye. Yugito felt her heart drop, as this would be the last time she would see the Raikage for an extended period of time, maybe even forever. Yugito, acting on impulse, gave the Raikage a quick hug from behind as she spoke softly, "Thank you, Ji-san." After delivering her final thank you to the man she called her uncle, Yugito bolted past him, not looking back. Meanwhile, Inoichi was hovering above the scene in an astral state, spectating the memory, his eyes wide at who Yugito ni actually was and how she had ended up coming here. The memory itself was enough to bring a grown man to tears, and it nearly made Inoichi tear up had he not been experienced at this sort of thing. This memory also brought up a huge question to the forefront of his mind, and he was determined to get his answer before he left. Inoichi was going to move on to the next memory when suddenly, a dark hole just tore open in the sky and blue, flame-like chakras shot through and ensnared him. Inoichi futilely struggled against the vile chakra, but was unable to break away or stop his telepathic link with Yugito as he was pulled into the hole from which the chakra came. In a bright flash of light, Inoichi opened his eyes to find himself in front of a huge gate, face to face with a giant, two-tailed cat made up of black and blue flame like chakra. It had one green eye and one yellow eye, and its teeth were bared angrily, showing off its razor-sharp canines. Inoichi nearly had a heart attack upon seeing the Bakaneko, and it took all his willpower not to pass out when it actually spoke. I shall warn you once and once only, human. If you dare return to the mind of my container, I will show you a hell that you could not imagine. I will burn your flesh, tear your body to pieces and crush it into fine powder. And since you are in the mind of my container, I will return you back into your original form and repeat the process over and over again. Watch yourself, human. The Nibi finished with a bestial roar that made Inoichi's heart want to explode. In an instant, Inoichi was thrown back into his own body and out of Yugito's mind. Naruto watched in silent boredom, having grown tired of seeing no movement for the past several minutes. It looked like both Inoichi and Yugito were both in some sort of deep trance, so when Inoichi suddenly screamed and fell back in the chair he was sitting in, Naruto was completely shocked and surprised. Naruto hurried over to Inoichi and helped him to his feet as Yugito began to regain her consciousness after being put in that trance, finding it odd that Naruto was helping Inoichi to his feet, feeling like she had missed something. "Are you okay, Yamanaka-san?" Naruto inquired, seeing that man was still trying to regain his breath as if he had been holding his breath underwater for an extended period of time. Inoichi took a couple deep breaths, calming his racing heart, shocked at what he had just discovered about this young girl. Not only was she the niece of the Raikage, but she was the Jinchuriki of the Nibi. "Yes, I'm fine. It's just that the technique that I used to interview Yugito-san takes a lot out of me," Inoichi lied, not telling that his technique involved reading the mind of his target. Yugito didn't see any issue with it, having missed Inoichi's scream just a moment ago, but Naruto was not fooled, his suspicions rising. "If the technique gets you tired, then why did you scream and fall out of the chair? There's something you're hiding," Naruto thought to himself, but put on an understanding expression to hide how suspicious he actually was. Naruto was extremely skilled when it came to hiding his real emotions, and it came in handy in situations like this one. "I have everything I need, and I'm pleased to inform that you passed with flying colors, Ni-san. Please come to the Hokage's office in 45 minutes where the final steps will be completed," Inoichi instructed as he said his goodbyes and exited Naruto's apartment in a silent hurry that also did not escape Naruto's attention, who narrowed his eyes, trying to understand what was going on. It took a moment before Naruto realized that Yugito was still in the room, removing the deducing look on his face and put a big ol' happy grin. "Great job, Yugito. All we have to do now is see Ji-chan and you can stay here. I can't wait." Although that was what Naruto verbally stated, in his mind he thought, "I don't know what he's hiding, but I'm going to find out." "Neither can I. Konoha is such a great place. I can't wait to be allowed to stay here," Yugito remarked, feeling a pang of guilt when a small thought of Kumogakure came back to her. Naruto was extremely happy for her and would have loved to stay and celebrate a little longer, but he needed to leave quickly. "It's been a while since we ate anything and I'm starving. I'll go grab some food to eat and I'll be right back as quick as a flash." Naruto rushed, waving a quick goodbye and darting out of the apartment before Yugito could argue that she wanted to come too. Yugito sighed at Naruto's rambunctious disposition and laid down on Naruto's bed, deciding to wait for her spontaneous friend. Naruto was hopping from rooftop to rooftop, building more and more speed as he rocketed towards the Hokage residence. Inoichi was just barely visible in the distance as he was also moving at high speed as if he had found some urgent information. That speed that Inoichi was moving at only heightened Naruto's interest as he continued his pursuit. Inoichi, in his single-minded thought of delivering his intel, Inoichi did not notice Naruto tailing him, which was a rookie mistake for someone of Inoichi's caliber. Naruto, using his heightened senses, watched as Inoichi entered the Hokage residence. Knowing that he would be discovered if he got too close, Naruto hid in a fast food restaurant just far away enough for him to be able to hear the goings within the Hokage's office. Naruto never paid attention to his heightened senses much, but at the moment, he was thankful that he was gifted with the perceptive senses. "Hokage-sama," Inoichi called loudly as he came bursting through the door without knocking as he normally would, immediately falling to one knee and bowing his head in a sign of respect. This sudden entrance piqued the elderly Hokage's interests at what Inoichi had to say that was so urgent. "What is it, Inoichi?" The Hokage inquired calmly, despite the fact that he was actually very curious rather than indifferent. Hiruzen was well aware that Inoichi had been interviewing Yugito, and since Yugito wasn't with him, the old Hokage was almost certain that Yugito was not an enemy spy. So the question was, what else could have come up? I apologize for the disturbance, Hokage-sama, but there is something urgent you must know about the newcomer, Yugito ni. Inoichi began with an apology before continuing with the main point of his arrival, but was then stopped by the firm, raised hand of the elderly shinobi. Before you continue, Inoichi, if it truly is as important as you are making it sound, please, make sure that there is nobody eavesdropping, the Hokage ordered of Inoichi politely as he dismissed his Anbu personal guard with a flick of the wrist. Inoichi nodded dutifully as he made one hand seal and closed his eyes, scanning the area around the office for anyone nearby while also checking for any hidden chakra signals that hinted the use of a jutsu. Inoichi, however, did not find such chakra signatures and gave a firm nod to the Hokage, showing that they were safe to speak without being overheard. The Sandaime Hokage understood the gesture before motioning for Inoichi to continue. Obeying the order, Inoichi spoke. Yugito ni is not just any ordinary citizen from Kumogakure. In fact, she is the niece of the current Raikage. Inoichi paused as he gave the Hokage time to digest the information being fed to him while also regaining his own composure, feeling as if he nearly degraded himself into a gossiping schoolgirl rather than an intelligence shinobi. Meanwhile, the Hokage was in complete and absolute shock at hearing this. It was not rare for somebody to come to Konohagakure to settle down, but they were usually just another common person. So then, why in the world would the niece of the Yondaime Raikage come to Konohagakure if she was not a spy? Wanting to know more, the Raikage saved his question and gestured for Inoichi to proceed. But that is not the most important piece of information that I have derived, Hokage-sama. Yugito ni is also the Jinchuriki of the Nibi. Inoichi exclaimed in a whisper, watching as the eyes of Hiruzen Sarutobi widened to lengths that they have never opened up to before. This was completely unexpected, and this only made Hiruzen more curious about how Yugito managed to get away. Was Kumogakure incompetent? This surely won't sit well with the Raikage, the Hokage commented with an anxious feeling building within him. It was worse enough that Yugito ni was the niece of the current Raikage, but to also be a Jinchuriki made the situation that much more worse and complicated. The Hokage knew that the Raikage would not start a war with Konohagakure in order to obtain just one person, but they could send a couple shinobi in a rescue attempt or possibly demand back what was theirs first. The Hokage was not sure if Yugito was followed by Kumogakure shinobi, but depending on whether or not she was or wasn't would decide the amount of time before they would have to make a confrontation with the other hidden village. Hiruzen was then surprised to hear what Inoichi had to say in response to his comment. That is what I would have believed as well, Hokage-sama, but while I was looking through her mind, I came across the memory of the night she left Kumogakure, Inoichi began, setting up the stage for the rest, taking a brief pause before continuing. Like all Jinchuriki, she was treated horribly in her village to the point where she would rather commit suicide rather than return to her village. The night she left, the Raikage himself stopped her, but she demands that she was let go or she would kill herself right then and there. The Raikage looked conflicted but had a soft spot for his niece like we all would and allowed her to leave. This concludes my report. The Hokage remained silent after Inoichi's report. Think over what he should do from this point on. Konohagakure now had 2 of the 9 Biju, but would the Raikage sit well knowing this? The relationships between Konoha and Kumo were strained as they were, and this could only degrade those ties even further. Much was unknown at this point, but the Hokage decided to set it aside for later contemplation. Although the situation is complicated, we will allow Yugito's citizenship and deal with Kumogakure when the day comes. I will take precautionary measures for the time being. Thank you for all your work, Inoichi, and I expect to see a full report of your findings hand-delivered to me soon. Also, all that has been learned about Yugito ni as of today is to be labeled an S-rank secret and not be shared with anyone unless given my direct approval. Are we understood? Hiruzen finished the night's discussion as Inoichi nodded in the affirmative, understanding the importance of the intelligence as he was dismissed by the Hokage, leaving the clipboard with Yugito's basic information written on the elderly man's desk just before exiting the office. The simple-minded desire to blame somebody for something that happens is causing the loss of innocence in such pure children. If only people could look past the Kyuubi and see that Naruto is actually a good boy. The only reason he pulls those pranks is to get recognized by the people of Konoha. At least he'll have somebody that's lived through the same thing close by from now on. Hiruzen Sarutobi thought to himself with a sigh, but yet a small smile as if the future looked bright for the blonde-haired boy. The Sandaime Hokage once again went to contemplating the chance outcomes of their encounter with Kumogakure and what should be done as a precaution. Naruto was bounding from building to building back to his apartment with a rather content look on his face. Naruto had left after hearing the Hokage say that Yugito would be granted citizenship since that was all that really mattered to him and even more so to Yugito. The young blonde male, however, was not completely ignorant to the rest of the conversation, and although he didn't understand certain parts, what he did understand caused some conflicting emotions to rise from him. Naruto had not the slightest idea of what a Jinchuriki was and who exactly the Raikage was, but decided not to dwell on the words for too long. He wouldn't be able to figure out the meaning of the words anyways with the knowledge that he was currently limited to, and he decided that he would be more advantageous to remember the words for another day. Something Naruto had not been at all pleased by was the fact that Yugito's privacy had been violated without her consent. It turned out that Naruto's suspicions were correct, and this so-called lie detector jutsu was actually a mind-reading jutsu. Naruto had half mind to tell Yugito about it, but the only thing that stopped him from telling her was because the Hokage was just being cautious like any good leader would. Also, if he did actually decide to tell Yugito, how would he go about telling her in such a way that she wouldn't feel like Konohagakure wasn't exactly the place she thought it was? Naruto wanted Yugito to think of this place as a type of heaven, and that feeling was mostly due to his eavesdropping a few minutes ago. Naruto had been allowed some insight into Yugito's past through his spying, and what he had learned just didn't sit right with him. Naruto clenched his fists and gritted his teeth as he thought about Yugito being treated horribly in her village just like he himself was, but it didn't even end there. She was pushed to suicide of all things and had nearly killed herself if she hadn't left that village when he did. The thought of Yugito taking her life just because she was being bullied by her village left him sick and momentarily hating the people that accused her and, to a certain extent, those that treated him the same way. Naruto had a small desire to talk to Yugito about her past, but had decided against it since she would then follow to ask about how he came to know what he did, and it would just cause trouble for everyone. Besides, it wasn't any of his business, and if Yugito wanted him to know, then she would have told him. He would have to wait until she felt comfortable enough with him to tell him of her past. Basically, if he deserved to hear it, then he would hear it. Even if she doesn't want to tell me, I'm not just gonna sit by and pretend that I didn't hear anything. I'm gonna make sure that she has such a great time here that she forgets all about Kumogakure, Naruto confidently thought to himself, the fires of determination kindling in his eyes. Naruto's eyes wandered down to the plain white plastic bag that he was carrying in his right hand, which contained the food that he had purchased from the store he had used to eavesdrop. Naruto wondered if it tasted any good since it had been the first time he had ever bought anything from there. Naruto couldn't even remember the name of the restaurant. There were only 2 small, white, foam containers, so Naruto knew that it wasn't going to be as filling as he had hoped, but if it tasted any good, then it probably would matter about the quantity. Quality over quantity, as some people would say. Naruto couldn't even remember the name of the dish but knew it had something to do with rice and chicken. Naruto hadn't really been paying attention to what he had ordered since he was so focused on listening in on the Hokage's conversation, but at the moment, he had wished he had been more aware. Then again, he didn't have much money left on him anyways, so he did do the best he could with what little he had left. It doesn't matter if I don't like it, I just hope Yugito does, Naruto quietly murmured to himself with a sigh as he increased his speed, realizing that he had unintentionally kept Yugito waiting a lot longer than he should have. Yugito, who had been patiently waiting for Naruto to return with their dinner, was now pacing in circles in the small apartment, silently wondering what was taking him so long to return. Could it be possible that he got into some sort of trouble along the way? Nah, Naruto knew this village too well to just fall into any trouble. He just probably got distracted by something, or there might be a long line at the place he went to. Calming down her overacting imagination, Yugito looked around the room to find something to do. The apartment was rather scarce since Naruto didn't look like the type of person to spend much time indoors. But Yugito's eyes soon fell on the multiple shopping bags Naruto had put down off to the side when they had entered with Inoichi Yamanaka. Looking down at her worn-out clothes and then back at the shopping bags, it only took her mind a second to process what she would do next as she pranced over to the bags and inspected the contents of each bag, looking for which one contained what she was looking for. What Yugito was looking for exactly was the attire she had selected that she would be wearing pretty much daily upon becoming a kunoichi. Just like Naruto had his orange jumpsuit, she also needed her own style. Finding the bag she required to make her new shinobi attire possible, Yugito retreated into the bathroom to get training and see how it looked on her, although she had tried it on once before in the changing room. She hadn't shown Naruto yet in hopes of surprising him later on. This was her chance. Yugito quickly began undressing herself, eager to try on her new clothing. Hastily pulling her old shirt off her body, Yugito reached down and dropped both her pants and panty in one swift movement. Now completely bare, Yugito rummaged through the shopping bag till she removed a black short-sleeved undershirt and a sleeveless, light purple zip-up over shirt. Along with the upper part of her attire, Yugito retrieved a pair of standard shinobi pants, preferring the pants over a kunoichi skirt or shinobi shorts. Yugito also followed to fetch out a plain black bra and black panties that would be worn under. Yugito pulled on her panties and slipped into her bra before stepping into the black shinobi pants. Yugito then picked up the black shirt and threw it on, before putting on the sleeveless over shirt, zipping it all way up. Finally being fully clothed, Yugito looked herself over in the mirror, her eyes falling on her long blonde hair that reached down to her mid-back with two strands going over each shoulder and down to her chest. Yugito was well aware that leaving her hair alone while being a kunoichi was out of the question as it would only get in the way. Yugito gathered her hair up as if preparing to make a ponytail but instead, tying it into a messy, yet stylish bun. The strands that went over her shoulder were left as was, Yugito deciding that it looked better that way. The blonde-haired teen looked herself over in the mirror, viewing herself from the front, her left side, her right side and finally her back. If anything, Yugito felt that she liked her attire more now than when she had actually purchased it. Yugito offhandedly wondered what Naruto would think of her new appearance, but she wasn't given the chance to think about it as she heard the door of the apartment open and close with an audible bang. "Food's here, Yugito. Where'd you go?" Naruto called for her as he placed the plastic bag with their dinner on the small table that was encircled by only two chairs. "I'm right over here." Naruto heard Yugito's voice coming from the bathroom behind him, causing him to instantly freeze up. Hell if he wanted a repeat of the bathroom incident. Seeing him go stiff, a confused look came upon Yugito's face. Naruto slowly turned his head, his shoulders tensing just in case. Not hearing a halting command, Naruto felt a little more comfortable and turned all the way around until Yugito came into view. Naruto's eyes widened at Yugito's appearance as a light blush stained his cheeks. Was this a girl really the same age as he was? She was something on an entirely different level of beauty compared to the other girls in his class. Naruto was completely breathtaken as he began stammering incoherent words of praise. "Why you look wow," Naruto remarked, taking in her figure which was akin to that of an hourglass with an expression of awe. Yugito blushed at his expression, giggling a little as she held her hands behind her back, feeling a little bit shy. "So, what did you get us?" Yugito diverted Naruto's fixed attention as he snapped out of his stupor, looking at the plastic bag that he had left on the table. "It's not ramen. I'll tell you that," Naruto responded, realizing that Yugito had eaten pretty much nothing but ramen since it was his favorite thing to eat. He had hardly given it a thought of whether or not Ichiraku ramen had been to her liking. "That's new," Yugito replied, taking one of the seats around the small wooden table before pulling two foam containers out of the bag. As Naruto took the remaining seat, Yugito placed one of the packages on his side of the table. Opening up their dinner, they were immediately greeted by a warm, great-smelling aroma. The fragrance caused a deep rumbling noise to sound from both of the blondes' stomachs as they took the complimentary chopsticks and called out in unison, "Itadakimasu." Putting in the first chopstick full of the rice and chicken, Naruto realized that it tasted unexpectedly great, but was more worried if the food was to Yugito's liking. Naruto knew his answer when he saw Yugito's eyes glitter in childlike happiness and satisfaction as the speed in which she was eating instantly increased. Naruto smiled as he too began eating at an accelerated rate, not wanting to be left behind. The meal itself wasn't exceptionally filling as it was not in the same quantity as any of their previous meals, but it was enough to get them through the rest of the night till they went to sleep. Besides, they had eaten a big breakfast and a relatively large lunch. Naruto decided to clean up, which wasn't all too difficult as he discarded the foam boxes in the garbage bin. Yugito, meanwhile, looked outside and seemed to go through some small mental calculations. "Isn't it about time we met the Hokage?" Yugito inquired of Naruto, who also thought about it for a moment. It should have been about 45 minutes since Inoichi had left. Naruto had taken a little longer than suspected to return to the apartment, and they did take some time eating their dinner, so it should be time to leave. Although, even if it hasn't been 45 minutes, Naruto was sure the Hokage wouldn't mind if they arrived a little earlier than expected. "Yay, let's get going," Naruto answered with a nod, stepping out of his house after Yugito, closing the door behind him. With one more nod, they jumped to the nearest rooftop, and with Yugito right next to him, they sped away to the Hokage residence. Upon arriving at the Hokage's residence, Naruto and Yugito were immediately allowed up since they already had an appointment and the Hokage was free at the moment. Making their way up the stairs and through the hallways, they arrived to the Hokage's door fairly quickly. Naruto was reaching over for the knob at the door when he noticed that Yugito was lightly trembling. Naruto slowly moved his hand away from the knob and placed it on her shoulder, grabbing her attention. "Is something wrong?" Naruto asked curiously, not seeing what there was to be scared about, but determined to make her feel more comfortable before moving any further. "It's just, I'm a little nervous," Yugito answered, feeling kind of embarrassed about it, since in her opinion, it was completely misplaced. Naruto didn't know what exactly was making her nervous since she didn't specify, but did his best to cover all the bases. "There's nothing to be nervous about, Yugito. Ji-chan is really nice and you're already allowed to stay here. Ji-chan just wants to see you to congratulate you," Naruto assured, fully knowing that what he spoke was the truth. Yugito felt relieved by Naruto's response, which always seemed to settle all of her unreasonable worries. Seeing that she was ready, Naruto knocked on the door a couple of times, rather than simply waltzing in. Naruto would not believe the relief that came upon the elderly Hokage's face when he heard a knock at his door. Hiruzen had been in the middle of doing the endless Hokage paperwork, so he was extremely relieved to get this little break. The Sandaime Hokage gladly put down his pen and paperwork as he called to the visitor, "Enter." As expected by the Hokage, Naruto and Yugito stepped into the room, greeting the elderly man. Yugito's greeting was far more formal than Naruto's had been or probably ever was. Seeing the two youthful faces full of anticipation, the Hokage had to let a grandfatherly smile escape him. Naruto let a small smile appear on his face, enjoying the familiar warmth that came from the Hokage, while Yugito was completely new to the feeling. "I'm sure you two don't want to spend too much time here, so how about we finish up quickly since this is merely a formality?" Hiruzen began seeing an increasingly larger smile appear on Yugito's face when she heard the word formality, while Naruto was trying to decipher what the word meant. "Congratulations, Yugito ni. As of today you have been realized as a citizen of Konoha. Hiruzen congratulated Yugito, who grinned in happiness, bowing as she thanked the Hokage from the bottom of her heart for letting her start anew. Naruto, who was right beside Yugito, jumped high into the air, pumping his fist in the air in celebration. "But there is however one last thing that we have to go over before you two can leave," Hiruzen continued with the meeting. Naruto moving to the back of the room and laying against the wall. Yugito merely looked at the Hokage curiously, wondering what was coming next. Seeing the questioning look on Yugito's faces, the Sandaime Hokage proceeded with a dutiful tone of voice. "We have to discuss your living arrangements," Hiruzen told the blonde girl, taking a brief pause before finishing. "I can refer you to a list of open apartments that I can offer you. Of course, you may take the list and look it over before deciding on one of them." Yugito had stopped listening after she heard the words, living arrangements. Not once had the thought of moving into an apartment ever crossed her mind. Since she had woken up in Konoha, there had always been Naruto. A young boy so energetic and childish, yet calm and mature, and yet knew how to make her feel safe and happy. Having been with Naruto this long, even if it was a couple days, gave her a feeling of belonging in Naruto's small, cozy apartment. Yugito looked at the list of addresses on the Hokage's desk and back at Naruto, who looking down and away. Yugito didn't want to be separated from Naruto since she felt so comfortable, but she didn't want to impose on his generosity. Yugito was extremely conflicted and had no idea what to do or say at the moment, and it showed on her face. Hirazen's eyes narrowed as he began to take apart the situation in front of him. Naruto looked up, having avoided eye contact with Yugito, and was now looking at the unsure expression on her face. Despite not being very knowledgeable on the things that most people his age knew, Naruto was very good at deciphering the thoughts and emotions of other people in certain situations. This skill was obviously a lot more handy, but Naruto was not sure when he had even begun to develop this skill. He had gotten increasingly better at doing so with time, to the point where he did it without thinking. Deciding that it was time to act, Naruto pushed himself off the wall and put on a smirk as he interrupted. "That won't be necessary, Ji-chan, since Yugito's going to be staying with me." The Hokage raised an eyebrow at Naruto's interjection, while Yugito blushed at how embarrassing Naruto's claim sounded. That is, Naruto paused, Yugito looking up and making eye contact with Naruto as he finished, "If she wants to stay." Yugito actually felt her heart flutter within her chest as she smiled at Naruto. "I'd like that very much," Yugito responded, Naruto giving a close-eyed grin as he placed both his hands on the back of his head, feeling rather relaxed at the moment. The Hokage eyed the two blondes with a smile that was hidden by his hands. The Hokage felt like he had watched Naruto mature right before his eyes. Yugito was something not completely unexpected but not at all unwanted. Hopefully she would continue to be a positive influence on him. Makes you wonder how much he'll change, Hiruzen mused to himself. The elderly man cleared his thought audibly, getting the attention of the two blondes. "Although I don't want to interrupt your celebration, there are two things that I must inform you of," the god of shinobi explained, Yugito nodding in understanding while Naruto lightly sighed at his moment dying as he went to lay on the wall again. "The first thing I need to talk to you about is extremely important since you came to this village alone. Since you have no means of an income, I will be supplying you with an allowance like I do with Naruto. You will continue be given so weekly, and it will end once you become a shinobi and are paid through your missions," the elucidated. Yugito was rather happy as she thanked the elderly Hokage. Now she wouldn't have to solely look to Naruto when it came to money. "And the last thing?" Naruto probed, not knowing what else the Hokage would need to discuss. That was the only benefit Naruto was pretty much given that was of any real importance. "Your first day at the academy is tomorrow, so make sure to wake up 7 o'clock sharp and immediately go to the main office. Tell them your name and they should put you in the right classroom. Or you could just follow Naruto since he'll be in the same class as you," the Hokage informed with a smile. Naruto's eyes practically shined at the thought of him and Yugito being in the same class. Come to think of it, there was a seat open right next to him. That meant Yugito would be seated right next to him. What a stroke of luck. "That's awesome. Thanks for everything, Ji-chan," Naruto exclaimed with a huge smile on his face that mirrored the one that was on Yugito's. Opening the door after he and Yugito gave their goodbyes, Naruto ran out with a spring in his step, Yugito right behind as they moved to return to their home. The young ones these days grow so fast. "Naruto, how much will you grow till the next time you visit me?" Hiruzen pondered with a chuckle as he rotated his chair to look out at the starry night sky outside. Taking his pipe from within his desk, Hiruzen took a short break as he overlooked his village. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.